Mm.
So welcome everybody to the May 10th, 2022 monthly meeting of the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board for the County of San Diego. Thank you for being here. I'll go ahead and get started with the agenda. And I would note that we do have a new staff member, but Mr. Parker has agreed to call roll and take the place of Pastor Robert Spriggs this evening because Pastor Robert Spriggs is not here tonight. So at this time, I would ask Mr. Parker to go ahead and call roll.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Youngflesh. Chair Youngflesh.
Present.
Vice Chair Delaney. We received word that Vice Chair Delaney may be 15 minutes late. We'll check back in with her in about 15 minutes. Pastor Spriggs will not be in attendance. Ms. Domingos. Nadia Keenayub. Bonnie Kenk.
Here.
Marian Pintar.
Here.
Mr. Ware.
Here.
Gary Wilson.
Present.
Chair Youngflesh, you have a quorum with 5.
Wonderful, thank you. And then moving on to agenda item number 2, which is public comment. And Mr. Parker, do we have any public comment tonight for this agenda item?
We have numerous requests to speak that we have received prior to the meeting, and I see that there are going to be some hands being raised. So what I will do is I will remind the public that this is an opportunity to address items that are not listed on the agenda, but that are within CLERB's jurisdiction. The only actions that we can take is that the board can direct the executive officer to take action on what you're saying or request that the item that you're discussing be placed on a future agenda. With that, I will call Karen Remus. Ms. Remus.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine, and your time starts now.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, CLERB members. My name is Karen Remus, and I'm a resident of San Diego County. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Last week, the San Diego Union Tribune reported that civil rights attorneys filed an emergency request in federal court to address the standard of care in San Diego County jails. As an attorney licensed for almost 30 years, I was deeply disturbed by declarations filed by former county jail staff members in support of that request. The UT story reported that in her declaration, former jail staff member clinician Jennifer Alonso wrote, quote, "I have observed my patients decompensate, suffer in what can only be described as filthy, inhumane conditions. My patients were subjected to terrible conditions and put at risk of great harm every day, and I felt powerless to give them the care they need and deserve." CLERB members, please continue pushing for reform. I ask that the executive officer take action on and the board place on its agenda a request for the interim sheriff, Anthony Ray, to appear at a CLERB meeting and 1, provide a detailed action plan to immediately correct the deficiencies detailed in the May 2nd emergency filing, as well as the numerous problems detailed in the JLAC report and the San Diegans for Justice report. And 2, that the interim sheriff provide a comprehensive overview detailing which CLERB policy recommendations to the San Diego County Sheriff's Office have been implemented and in what manner, as well as a specific timeline for response on all currently open CLERB recommendation requests. Thank you so much for your service to our county.
And thank you. Next, we will go to Lynn Owens. Lynn Owens, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Your time starts now. Let's try this again. Lynn Owens, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
Your time starts now.
Okay. My name is Lynn Owens. I live in zip code 92131. SDSD needs powerful changes now, as documented by the JLAC report, San Diegans for Justice, CPE, State Audit Analytica study, and what was just talked about, the recent emergency filing from the local civil rights attorneys. We also need culture change that offers more support to both staff and the people in custody. Thank you, CLERB, for all your work, but I don't see these deficiencies changing fast enough. My asks to you, 1, invite Sheriff Ray to address the CLERB meeting and identify SDSD priorities and timetables for the duration of his term. Today's agenda includes 11 policy recommendations from CLERB that are pending responses from SDSD. And it seems like every week brings new documentation of what is needed. Let's do everything possible to encourage Sheriff Ray to use his leadership to implement these needed changes. Number 2, see whether the AMEND program at UC San Francisco might help SDSD steer and implement these needed changes. I have a quote here from an article I read. For the past 6 years, AMEND has worked with legislators and correctional staff in 7 states, including California, to turn prison cultures away from retribution and toward health and healing. The program has begun slowly but surely to improve the well-being of those who live and work in American prisons, end quote. I'm sending 2 links about the AMEND program to Executive Director Paul Parker to share with all of you, because AMEND addresses the physical and mental health of both inmates and staff. It can perhaps give SDSD a more unified approach to our much needed changes. Thank you for your time and for your willingness to keep pushing.
Thank you very much. Let the record reflect that both members Nadia Kinayoub and Buki Dominguez are present. Next, we will go to Mary Best.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Your time starts now.
Thank you so much. Good evening, and thank you, CLERB members, for allowing me to speak. My name is Mary Best, and I'm a therapist and member of the Racial Justice Coalition San Diego. Thank you for your work, especially with regards to recent policy recommendations to the department for critically needed policy changes. In light of yet another death in custody, the 9th this year, you're all aware, it's clear that the San Diego law enforcement system is in dire crisis. The house is on fire, and no one within that house so far is sounding the alarm. Rather, they're stating that they're addressing problems as best they can, and we have heard that from the person who's running for sheriff, but lack sufficient resources, even with $1 billion plus budget. So our most vulnerable and at risk, they continue to be at risk, dying in and out of custody. And now inmates have gone on hunger strikes to protest the lack of decent, humane care and treatment in the jails. You've made these recommendations to ensure the safety, civil and human rights of individuals, both in the community, on the streets and in the jails, such as stopping the vehicle pursuits and nonviolent crimes, pretext traffic stops, evaluating those discretionary decisions and stops, body-worn cameras, all of those recommendations, determining bias and harassment interactions with people of color, and in the jails, immediate timely proof of life safety checks and all cells with operable cameras. I mean, these are no-brainers. These are things that should have been in place years and years ago. So, and the instituting pre-employment screening for individuals seeking employment, weeding out those with racial bias who may, if they are hired, present a threat to the safety of the community by their behaviors, both explicit and implicit. Without transparency and accountability, our community will continue to be at risk from rogue officers who continue to disrespect life and will continue to be emboldened without accountability or prosecution to further harass, harm, and threaten our most vulnerable with impunity. You've made these recommendations. We've heard there's a court injunction for a timely response and action plan from the Sheriff's Department. I echo the CLERB recommendation for Interim Sheriff Ray to appear before the CLERB to address the recommendations and the timetables for policy changes. What more can you at CLERB do in this crisis to press the department to enact those recommendations, change the culture of the status quo, and ensure that no more human lives are lost on our streets and in the jails needlessly. Thank you so much for your service and for being a response to this crisis. And it is truly a crisis. Thank you so much.
And thank you. As I don't see any other requests to speak on the call itself, I do have some comments that were desired to be read into the record, and I'll do so now. The first one comes from Robin Sales, who's unable to join the meeting tonight, but makes it very clear that she would support the Attorney General being brought in to run the San Diego County jails due to the number of deaths and the increasing number of deaths. That's from Robin Sales. Next, we have a comment from Noemi Abrego saying, I want to say that if any non-American agendas are passed, the County of San Diego will be sued. Thank goodness I'm not a Democrat anymore. Next, we have Tom Packard. Mr. Packard writes, from Tom Packard, a member of Showing Up for Racial Justice North County. I feel the need to repeat some of the requests and suggestions I have made at past meetings, since I have not seen adequate attention to some issues that I hope you see as critical. While Paul Parker has several times emphasized the need for systemic change in the jails, the members of CLERB as a whole have not shown nearly as much attention to this level of change. Please go beyond making reactive recommendations regarding individual incidents and present to the sheriff your expectations regarding the major issues that need fuller attention. At a minimum, ask the sheriff to prevent detailed actions taken to date regarding all recommendations from the CLERB, the state audit, and other sources. I hope you have concluded that the Sheriff's Department response letter in the analytical report is lacking in detail, and that you will ask for more specifics on their actions and plans to address issues raised there. I also repeat here my suggestion from last month. Invite Sheriff Ray and Teresa Adams Hydar to a meeting, even though the sheriff has a limited time to initiate change, and insist that he go beyond a caretaker role and present to you specifically what he plans to do, at least begin true systems change. Thank you for your attention. And finally, from Natalie Nishat. Hi, CLERB members. My name is Natalie Nishat. I am from zip code 92131. Thank you for your continued work in our community. The San Diego Sheriff's Department has been handed a plethora of information and data-driven recommendations to improve its racial inequities and care of individuals in its jails. Recently, the Analytica study, state audit, CPE report, JLAC report, San Diegans for Justice report, and emergency requests filed by civil rights attorneys as noted in the Union Tribune last week are among such invaluable data that the SDSD should incorporate into future change. In light of Interim Sheriff Ray's new term, I am curious to understand how he will respond to this information in order to fight the racial injustices so clearly highlighted in our system. I urge CLERB to request the sheriff share his detailed plan of action, including references to the aforementioned data and timelines for implementation. I also urge CLERB to invite Sheriff Ray to present this plan at a coming CLERB meeting in order to enhance the accountability, transparency, and expedient completion of such plans. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Those are the only comments I have that are documented to be read into the record. At this point, I see that Yusuf Miller, Mr. Miller.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Yusuf Miller. I'm with the North County Equity and Justice Coalition and the Saving Lives in Custody campaign and the Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego. San Diego County is in crisis. It's just every time we turn around, we turn on the news, we look and we see that there is another in custody death. These in custody deaths are localized within the pre-trial community, and they're dying mostly. They're in this area, and they're dying. And what are we doing? We're trying to get our hands around it, but it's not fast enough. We have people dying weekly, it seems. So let's put a redoubled effort. We have the recommendations from the audit. We have this injunction that's going in. Now the inmates are striking on the very things that we're asking for, that we've been asking for since 2020. We really need to get our hands under this because not one more family should have to come to the North County Equity and Justice Coalition Saving Lives in Custody campaign and see that their family member was lost in a very, very preventable situation. So it's just, I'm at a loss of words because we've been here month after month, year after year, talking about this issue. And it's really, I can't even imagine what these families are going through. I talked to some of them and they just seek justice and they hope that this doesn't happen to any more of their family members or friends. But yet again, we'll hear it in the news and we go to sleep every night dreading the fact that we're going to wake up to a news report of another in custody death. Whether it's suicide, whether it's overdose, whether it's neglect, whether it's abuse, none of it should be taking place in our county system. So we have a huge mountain to climb. We have an exorbitant amount of information on the problems that we're having in this jail system. And we realize that we cannot take care of it internally. We need an outside investigative or an outside administrative force to come in. And I think that office is the office of the Attorney General, Rob Bonta, to come in and take over administratively from the Sheriff's Department. This is not the first time it's been asked. It was asked way back in 1990 from the supervisors back at that time. And all these decades later, we're still having a crisis, a problem in services, a problem in the police department, and the rogueness of the system that penalizes people before they're even charged. They have a death sentence before they're even charged. We have to do something. It's the moral thing to do. It's the humane thing to do. We have to get our arms around it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. At this point, I see no other requests to speak. I have received no others. With that, Chairperson Youngflesh, I'll turn it back to you. And also, Chairperson Youngflesh, let the record reflect that Vice Chair Delaney is here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Now moving on to minutes approval, agenda item number 3. And I would note that we do have 2 minutes to approve the regular board meeting from. We don't. And I apologize, Chairperson Youngflesh. That will be sent at our next meeting. As you'll see, we now have full-time administrative support. We've been doing just enough to get by, to be honest with you, just to maintain the operations, to push forward the changes that were with the policy recommendations and our case investigations. Administratively, we've been short, but that is ended as of yesterday. I'll talk more about that in my EO report. So that will be for next month. My apologies, Chair Youngflesh. Okay. Well, I'm glad that we do have full support now. Then moving on to Dr. Campman, which is our presentation and training. And Mr. Parker, I didn't know if you want to give a brief introduction.
Sure, I would like to do so. And also in reference to public comment in reference to this item, if council is okay with it, perhaps we can hold off on public comment until after we hear Dr. Campman, and then we can open it up for public comment afterwards. Would that be okay, council?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Dr. Campman, Dr. Stephen Campman. He is the San Diego County Chief Medical Examiner. Full disclosure, and I want everybody in the public to know, for what it's worth, or what my opinion is worth. I've worked with Dr. Campman. I worked with him 20 years ago when I was an investigator and then the chief investigator in San Diego at the medical examiner's office. And I will say that I have learned more about in-custody death investigations and quite a bit about death investigations from Dr. Campman himself. So I will throw that out there for what that is worth. I have a lot of respect for him. I am very, very appreciative that he's been willing to come tonight. Dr. Campman is aware of the concerns that the community has had in reference to the medical examiner's office, the thought that they're somehow in cahoots with the sheriff's department, and that they don't do their own independent cause and manner of death determinations, the delays in tox time, neglect when it comes to natural death cases. Dr. Campman is here to provide an overview and to attempt to address the board members' concerns and the public's concerns as best as possible. He's been the chief medical examiner now for about a year. I think I'm correct, Dr. Campman. And then prior to that was the chief deputy medical examiner, and then prior to that was in the Air Force. And you can tell much more about yourself if you'd like, Dr. Campman. But with that,
sure,
I will turn it over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks. And let me get the share screen thing going here. I think that should work. Is it working?
Yes.
Okay. Next thing will be make sure I can get the slides to move. That worked?
Yes.
Good. Well, thank you for having me here. I always think it's best to give good information and get it out to as many people as we can. What I'm talking about today, I gave some of it at a high school this morning, and I've given it around the community and to other people and students over the years. But I want to introduce you to the medical examiner's office. A lot of people don't understand exactly who we are and what we do and what we're charged with doing. So I'm going to start with what is forensic pathology, and then describe medical legal death investigation in the United States, the difference between a medical examiner and a coroner. the laws that set up what the coroner or medical examiner do in California, and then how we do things in San Diego County, basically. And then some definitions about cause of death and manner of death. And then some information about what the medical examiner does, altogether. So first, forensic pathology. Pathology, in its greatest sense, is the study of disease. It has two main branches, anatomical and clinical pathology. First, clinical pathology, one can think of any of the hospital laboratories, like the blood bank, immunology, chemistry, toxicology, virology. Those are all part of clinical pathology. Anatomical pathology, one can think of anytime something is taken off of someone or out of someone and sent to a doctor for diagnosis, that'll be part of anatomical pathology. So somebody has a skin biopsy, or has their appendix taken out, or something taken out in surgery, or coughs something up, or has a pap smear. Those are all part of anatomical pathology. And autopsy is part of anatomical pathology too. Forensic pathology is a subspecialty of anatomical pathology that deals mostly with the diagnosis of diseases and injuries that cause sudden death. So that's forensic pathology. In the United States, there are two main systems for medical legal death investigation, the coroner system and the medical examiner system. The end result of each is about the same. There'll be a determination about a cause of death and a manner of death. The main difference is who's in charge and responsible for making that determination. In a coroner system, that person making that medical legal determination is a lay person, that is a non-medical person. And that person could be elected or appointed and may not have, again, medical training at all. In our 58 California counties, in fact, most coroners are the sheriff. The sheriff is the coroner. So 30 something of the 58 counties in California are sheriff coroner counties. There's a double handful or so that are independent coroners, and then 5, like San Diego County, that are independent medical examiners, so not connected to the sheriff's department or any other department. The medical examiner, as I mentioned, is independent of other agencies. It varies with the county where the funding comes from, or how the county organizes the administration. Sometimes it's public health department. In our county, we're part of the public safety group, like the district attorney and public defender, alternate public defender, animal services, sheriff. They're all emergency medical services. They're all part of the public safety group. And that's where we fit in. We here do have a medical examiner, and it's headed by a medical doctor specifically trained in death investigation. And that person is the one responsible for the cause and manner of death determination. There are two main laws in California that set up the coroner's jurisdiction. They're Government Code Section 27491 and Health and Safety Code Section 102850. They say similar things. First, the Health and Safety Code says basically, anytime someone knows of a death that is without medical attendance, and that means they don't have a doctor at all, not that their doctor's not sitting with them when they die. So without medical attendance. The next, if they do have a doctor, but their doctor hasn't seen them in the last 20 days, then they should be reported to us as well. And if the doctor is unable to, and that often works out to is unwilling to sign a death certificate or write a death certificate, then we also get notified of the death. These deaths that appear to be natural deaths, the government code does allow for us to what's called waive jurisdiction. That is, if we can find their doctor and they saw them, say, 30 days ago, but knew they had serious diseases that could result in their death, then their own doctor can then sign their death certificate. More of the Health and Safety Code, anytime something other than a natural cause is thought to at least contribute to the death, then we should be notified about the death. So any kind of an overdose or injury, anything that's not natural contributing to the death, whether it be suicidal, accidental, or homicidal, then we should be notified of the death. And in fact, in California, normal doctors can't sign a death certificate where there's something other than a natural cause contributing to the death. So it has to be just a natural disease for the person's doctor to sign their death certificate. Other deaths have to come to the coroner or medical examiner for review. The government code says similar things, but adds a few more, like a death, even if it's a natural death thought to be the result of a contagious disease constituting a public health hazard, should be reported to the medical examiner or coroner. And that would be like COVID. So the deaths would be reported to us. But again, if it appears to be a natural death and their own doctor has knowledge of the death, then they can sign the death certificate. Deaths resulting from some work exposure or injury should be reported to us. Deaths in state mental hospitals, there actually aren't too many of those hospitals around anymore. But this is, it's an old part of the law back when those state hospitals were dangerous places for patients to be. So it was that the coroner would then review the deaths and examine the people to see if there were injuries or something like that. So it's still on the law, even though we don't have those hospitals here. We actually, in our county, we have a county-run geriatric hospital that voluntarily has all of their deaths reviewed by us. So we examine all of the patients that die in the county geriatric hospital at their request for the same reason. Repeating any deaths thought to have been the result of a criminal act of another. And then basically, anytime someone thinks they should report the death, they should. That between the two, it includes any, again, violent, sudden, unusual, unexpected, unattended deaths, anytime an injury or illness, or not an illness, but an injury was inflicted by someone else or caused by the person or someone else, then that'll be referred to us. Deaths of a public health concern, and others that actually includes people that die under sentence or people that die in custody should be referred to us. Even if they're in state prison and they've been dying, they've had liver cancer and they're transported to their contract hospital and die with hospice care at a hospital, they're still under sentence. So we still examine their body and review their case. So that's another class of deaths we'll review. In our county, we have the one medical examiner for the population of 3.38 million people and 4,300 square miles. Last year, there were just over 32,000 deaths registered in our county. And yearly, the medical examiner hears about half of them. So fully half straight off away, their own doctors sign their death certificates and we don't have any involvement with the death. We hear about half of them, and our investigators make an initial evaluation to determine which one of the government codes would, the death would fall under our jurisdiction, and then determine whether or not we need to further investigate. So if, say, someone is 83 years old and had bypass surgery and then had to have a cardiac bypass surgery and then had their coronary arteries, had stents put in after that, and they have trouble controlling their diabetes, and they're found dead at home and the doors are locked and there's nothing missing, looks like a natural death. Again, we can waive jurisdiction and not further investigate that death if we contact their doctor and they're willing to sign the death certificate. So of the half that we hear about, the majority do not need further investigation. Last year, we took just over 4,400 deaths to further investigate. And depending on the year, last year and this year, about half of the people we investigate have a full autopsy. The other half either have review of their medical records or have an external examination of their body that may involve x-rays or toxicology and a medical record review. We have the one facility here in the county in Kearney Mesa, where I'm sitting. I'm not sure if my cursor show on there. Yep. So I'm right here in this building right now. The building was constructed and construction was complete in 2009. And it's big, spacious, and has good lighting and good equipment for examinations and for working. Again, one facility for the county. Our staff is 60 employees. I'm not sure this adds up to 60 right now, but there are about 18 or 20 investigators. Right now we have 5 forensic pathologists and 1 trainee, 8 autopsy assistants. We have our own toxicology lab, and we do our toxicology in-house, so we have the staff for that. Administrative staff, transcriptionists, medical transcriptionists for our reports, research volunteer, a chaplain volunteer, and in fact, we're the only coroner medical examiner's office in the state that has a full-time chaplain. The people that actually help transport the bodies are a service contracted by the county, and they'll transport the bodies. Let me see if I need to further describe any of these people here. The investigators I'll talk about later. Pathologists, briefly. Our autopsy assistants are all licensed funeral directors or embalmers. The county has thought that that kind of background is important for dealing with the funeral homes and with working with the bodies. The rest I'll, if we need more later. So our process here in San Diego is basically this. There's a notification. It's usually by a law enforcement agent notifying us of a death after they've responded to a 911 call. Sometimes it's hospitals. Less frequently, it's a funeral home that already has possession of a body, and very, very infrequently is it a family that calls us to say someone has died. Normally, people call 911 to report a death. The investigator evaluates the call and sees if further investigation is needed or required. And then, depending on the circumstance, there's a death scene investigation. I'll describe that in a little bit. If someone's dead in a hospital, then we'll often just send the transport company there and collect medical records and then have to bring the body in. But if they're, except of course, if something at the hospital was part of the cause of death, then we'll investigate at the hospital, but not in most cases as a hospital. The body is then brought here and has an examination, whether it be an external examination or an internal and an external examination. And then laboratory studies like toxicology or like a COVID test, or in the case of an infant death, we do metabolic studies, the newborn studies. And then sometimes there's follow-up investigation. If we see something at the autopsy that doesn't make sense with the circumstances we've heard, or we just find something that needs more clarification, like we see someone has an injury, but need to figure out the circumstances better, then we'll further investigate more to get the information we need. Our investigators have various backgrounds. Some are former nurses, some are former law enforcement agents, some are current or former EMTs or paramedics. Right now, a few of ours are our own former autopsy assistants, so they're former funeral directors. They have a year of basically on-the-job training with a running in period and then supervision. So their backgrounds are varied. Again, if someone dies at somewhere out in the public or someplace other than in a hospital, then we'll send an investigator. And in cases of suspected homicide, we often also send a pathologist as well. There are cases where the investigation is handled in-house or handled in office. And those are, again, are people that have been in a hospital for a while, and the investigation is handled by records and telephone and interviewing people like that. So about our investigation. Our investigations are separate from other agencies' investigations. We're in a good position in that we got 1 foot in the medical community and 1 foot in the legal community. So we have access to medical records right away. We do have power to subpoena, but mostly the hospitals and doctors' offices just send us the records we need. We're able to speak with people who are at the scene of the death and relatives and families of people. We can speak with the people's doctors. If there is a law enforcement agency investigating, we'll be able to talk to those people and interview them too. And again, we're separate from other law enforcement agency investigations. You know, there's one kind of point that shows up the difference between our investigation and, say, a police department's investigation, is that ours is pretty much centered around right around the time of the death. You know, that day when the body is there. Our investigator gets enough information to determine if the death should be classified as homicide, suicide, accident, natural, or undetermined, and I'll describe those later. If homicide, it's not necessarily to determine who pulled the trigger or who did this or who should have done that or how many people were involved. It's just enough to classify the death for the state's vital records, for the death certificate. Determining who did what, or who might have done what, or who's responsible, that's for the legal system, and that's a separate determination. So our investigations are shorter and may have a different conclusion than other agencies. When we do take jurisdiction and bring a body in, the body comes to our office and is held in refrigeration until the examination happens, and that's usually within a day of when we get the body. On the weekends, we have only 2 pathologists working each day, and our professional standard, we try to limit ourselves to 2 autopsies per person per day. So say if 10 people died on Friday night, it could be that only 4 get examined on Saturday and 4 get examined on Sunday. So 2 more people, you know, would have their exam on Monday when everyone else got back to the office. And in the last year, there's been a pretty good increase, actually over 2 years, a 32% increase in the number of deaths we've examined. So, and in that time, a 38% decrease in the number of pathologists. So there have been times where bodies have had to wait up to 5 days for their examination. But then, you know, the numbers level out and we're able to see everybody within a day again. So most people are examined within a day or 2 of when they arrive here. And they're available, their body is ready for release generally right after the examination on that same day. Identification. Around the country, it's not just San Diego County, but around the country, identification is usually made visually. So with a comparison with a government identification card or recognition by family or friends at the scene of the death. We do positive scientific identifications we now do fingerprints for all homeless people that come under our jurisdiction. And people that aren't visually recognizable. So they've had some changes after death that make them unrecognizable, or they've been in a fire or injured in some way. So most identifications are visual, but we do fingerprints, DNA, and dental comparisons, and sometimes X-ray comparisons for certain people too. X-ray, we mostly use for looking for foreign objects in people, not to diagnose a disease. Because if you think about it, a doctor does an X-ray because they can't, you know, if someone's coughing, they can't just look at their lung and figure out why they're coughing, but we can, and we do. So we don't use X-rays for that. We use them to look for a bullet or for part of a knife, or if someone's unidentified, John or Jane Doe, we can look to see if they have a pacemaker or an orthopedic plate or something that might have a serial number on it that we could use to help identify them. So our examinations, Again, it depends on the year. If someone gets a full autopsy or an external examination, and the case itself, the percentage, the ratio of autopsy or external examination varies with the year, but every person is evaluated individually, and a determination is made if they need a full autopsy, or if a cause of death can be determined reasonably based on their medical history and an examination of the outside of their body to look for trauma, maybe x-rays and toxicology also, or maybe a COVID test or something like that too. The equipment we use is not especially high tech for the autopsy. It's the same kind of equipment that's been used for hundreds of years. The upper right-hand corner thing that looks like branch cutters from Home Depot, that's branch cutters from Home Depot. We use it for opening ribs. A good knife is important. Syringes for collecting toxicology specimens are important. The bottom center thing there, that black piece of rubber, is called a block. And we use that to help position the body. So we can, most of the body is put under the chest to help open up the chest and abdomen, but it can be used to help position the head or the neck. It's just an all-purpose piece of equipment. Camera is important. And then a place to do the autopsy. It is very helpful that we have a good stainless steel, running water, well-lit, bright place to work. But autopsies can be done in the back of a funeral home. A friend of mine did an autopsy on someone's front lawn in the middle of a war. So an autopsy can be done anywhere, but it's best if we can have a place like the county has here where we can, there's good equipment and lighting. The autopsy and examination may have two parts, an external examination alone or an external and an internal examination. For the external examination, we look at everything we can see on the person. I go through the outside of the body about 3 times usually. Once, the first time, just introducing, what kind of person, their height, their weight, their, age, race, sex, just a basic overall description of them. And another time looking for things that have been with the body for a long time, like scars or tattoos, things like that. And then another time, things that are fresh, like injuries. So I go over multiple times. We document medical devices. So if someone has their endotracheal tube in the right hose, or if they have an intraosseous catheter, to get fluids into the body, if it made it into the bone, or if it was misplaced in the tissue, we'll document those position of those. And then of course, injuries. And then the internal examination is a thorough examination inside the body, and every organ is examined, whether it looks healthy or unhealthy or seems to be involved in the death or not. Our purpose is to make an objective documentation about the condition of the body, because we don't know what questions might come up in the future. For example, once I had an older gentleman that parked his car on a hill and walked out behind his car, and the car rolled and hit him and caused terrible head injuries. So the cause of death was no problem. Even without an autopsy, we can tell he died from head injuries. But in the course of the complete autopsy, we documented everything. And then a couple years later, attorneys called and wanted to know about his heart and his lungs. For his wife sued the car company for not making a parking brake warning light or whatever the suit was about. The suit isn't our problem, but that we documented the condition of his heart allowed the attorneys to better settle or make a determination about how to settle the case based on how bad his heart disease was, which we couldn't have known that would be a question in the future. So that's why we objectively document the condition of the body. We often take samples for microscopic examination to either confirm a diagnosis or make a diagnosis. Other laboratory studies like toxicology or microbiology, virology sometimes, genetic studies sometimes. So those are other things that may be required. Our toxicology specimens, we collect, we can collect several. So we collect blood from the heart from a leg vein, a fluid in the eye we sometimes use, urine, sometimes tissue like liver, or the contents of the stomach. Those are like that would be the kind of a complete set that we might take, but often just blood is all we need to use. During the autopsy, when we examine an organ, we weigh the organs and then dissect them. When we're done with the dissection, except for any samples we take, we collect a 12-ounce jar that has a sample of every organ in it, whether or not it looks diseased or not diseased. We have a small sample. The rest goes with the body. So their organs after dissected are placed back in the chest and abdomen in a bag, and then the body is sewn like this, and the body is then ready for release to the funeral home, usually that very afternoon after the autopsy. Often, however, the funeral homes and the families leave the bodies here until they're ready. Sometimes that's days or weeks that we store the bodies for them. But really, the most bodies are ready to go from here the day of their examination. We generate 3 reports, an autopsy report, an investigator's report, and a toxicology report. And all of our reports are public record. That dates back to case law regarding coroners from, I think, the 50s. And the reports we generate are documents prepared by the government in the course of our normal work, and they are public record. There are some redactions that can and do occur. They're things, often medical history that we learn from a medical provider that's not related directly to the cause of death, then we're required to redact that. So we'll darken that out. But the majority of the report is available unless a case is sealed. Anybody can get anybody's autopsy report because it's public record. So, it's just the way it is in California. Some states, the autopsy reports are private and require consent for release, but in California, they're public record. Forensic pathology, our 2 main determinations are cause of death and manner of death. Cause of death is that injury or illness that resulted in death. It can be a thing like a stab wound of the neck, or cancer of the pancreas, or diabetes mellitus, or fentanyl toxicity. Those are all causes of death. What's not on the slide here is the mechanism of death, or how that injury or illness actually resulted in the death, the physiology. So like a stab wound of the neck. The mechanism of death could be blood loss from the injury, but it could also be air getting pulled into the jugular vein and going to the heart and filling the heart so that it can't pump effectively. Those are 2 different mechanisms of death for the same cause of death. And we can't always define the mechanism of death. Like for fentanyl toxicity, someone may die from fentanyl, a kind of a coma, a slower central nervous system depressant death where they fall asleep and then have a coma and die. Or they may die a much faster death from a mechanism called the wooden chest syndrome. So the body has kind of a hormone neurotransmitter involved mechanism with norepinephrine that causes almost like a respiratory paralysis. So the breathing stops much faster. And so it's a different mechanism of death, and we can't always know which mechanism it was, but we can know the cause of death or the toxicity. So that's cause of death and mechanism of death. The manner of death is a 1-word way to classify the circumstances of the death for the state's public health statistics. In California, there are 5 choices for that classification: natural, suicide, homicide, accident, and undetermined. None of them has a real, like a perfect single definition. And there are convention, in practice conventions where it's standard classifications. Some things don't make sense sometimes, but these manners of death are used for consistency, again, for the public health statistics or data. So I kind of get a kick sometimes when I hear on the news, the coroner ruled it a homicide or ruled it a suicide. Not really ruling anything. We're giving an opinion of how the death should be classified for the public health statistics. So I'll just briefly talk about each of these. In the group of people we see, the majority of the people we see are accidental deaths. So all of these people had sudden and unexpected deaths. The accidental deaths we see, the majority of those are drug overdoses now, and the majority of those involve fentanyl. The next biggest group are natural deaths. And those again are people that either have a sudden or unexpected death without a known history, or their doctors couldn't or wouldn't say why they died. Suicide is the next biggest group, homicide after that, and undetermined after that. And I'll talk about those other manners as well. So natural deaths are deaths that result only from a process of aging or a disease. Here's an example of a heart that has a coronary artery thrombosis. So here's the artery that serves the heart muscle, and it's got a blood clot in it. So any part of the heart muscle after that part of the artery that has the block in it wouldn't get oxygen anymore, and the person would have a heart attack or an infarct. So here's the heart muscle. The healthy muscle should be this reddish, the muscle looking part. The muscle that died because it didn't get enough oxygen is this tannish yellow part, and that's dead heart muscle. And if about half the people that have a heart attack like that die, the other half live through it. If they live through it long enough, we can see these changes in the heart muscle as the muscle begins to heal, and eventually that would scar. So we can see that after death. So that would be a natural death, someone that dies of a disease or a process of aging. An accidental death is an unexpected death that results from an action or lack of action that wouldn't reasonably be expected to result in injury or death. And of all the manners of death, that one kind of has the best definition. And we sometimes use that definition to explain why something's a suicide. For instance, if somebody takes 3 whole bottles of pills and overdoses and dies, and then their family calls up and is mad or sad or angry that we classify it as a suicide. And they say it was a cry for help, so we can't classify it as suicide. They were just looking for help or attention. Then we say, well, we can't really classify it as an accidental death because a reasonable person wouldn't think you can empty out 3 whole bottles of pills and eat them and live. So that's why it has to be classified as a suicide. So we'll sometimes use this definition to help describe the other manners of death. Some accidental causes of death. The upper right there is someone that had smoke inhalation. The center, of course, is injection drug use. The upper left is someone that had an electrocution burn electrocution burn. And then the bottom left is people that died with carbon monoxide toxicity when they tried to heat their living room or their house with a barbecue and got the carbon monoxide from that. So those are accidental causes of death. And some inconsistencies sometimes. The differences between a court determination and the manner of death determination for a death certificate. I described how an accidental death would be an unexpected death that results from an action or lack of action that wouldn't be reasonably expected to result in death. So knowing that, and knowing, I think most of the public should know that anytime someone buys a pill from somewhere other than a pharmacy and crushes up the pill and smokes the fumes from it and overdoses and dies, like that would be a fairly, it's a pretty common thing to happen. And why would we then classify any drug overdose death as an accident if it's a reasonably expected death that someone does that? Why wouldn't we classify any overdose as a suicide? Because people know if they smoke a drug like that, that they could die. And that's because it's a practice convention. It's normal to classify drug overdose deaths as accidental, unless we know someone took something on purpose to die, or someone, snuck them something and poisoned them, but it's a practice convention. Another thing like that is, say somebody was walking in a crosswalk and got hit by a car and killed. Their death certificate will classify their death as an accident because they're in a car accident. They got hit by a car. But what if the person that hit them was a drunk driver and had already been convicted of, drunk driving and killing someone? In the courts, that person could be charged with and convicted of second-degree murder, for instance. And that's a real example I gave. Yet the person's death certificate classifies their death as an accident because it's the practice convention for the state vital records. Homicide is another of the manners of death. Doesn't have a single great definition. The one we often use here is death at the hands of another. And it doesn't, the homicide classification doesn't require criminal intent, and it actually doesn't even require intent to kill, but it does require that something was done or not done that at least contributed to the death in a way that doesn't meet accident. And there are some inconsistencies or some common sense with this too. For instance, someone calls up the 911 and says, hey, you better go to this school and look for somebody who's got a gun. And so officers respond, and there is indeed someone in the dark, and they say, hey, you come over here. And he comes out and he has his hand in his pants, and they say, get your hands out of your pants. And he pulls his hand out and he's got a gun. And they tell him, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun. And instead he points it at him and then ends up running at them with the gun pointed at them, and they shoot him. And they immediately call, for a rescue, and they start CPR, and the person dies. And in that person's pocket is a note that says, I'm sorry to the officers, I may do this. So it is what people would call suicide by cop. So they purposely got shot. Yet their death was at the hands of another. They were shot by someone else. So their death certificate will have their death classified as homicide. There is a part in our autopsy reports where we can give an opinion. And in that part, we can say that this death likely represents what people call suicide by cop. And we can clarify there, but it's standard practice to list a death like that as homicide. In our county, we see most homicides are caused by firearms, followed by cutting or stabbing, followed by blunt force injuries, followed by asphyxiation. And that other 10% includes onesies or twosies, like crossbow bolt injury, or sometimes we'll give a cause of death called homicidal violence, where there's a combination of things that we can tell someone it's a homicide, but can't necessarily pinpoint a single cause. So those are the manners of death. In forensic pathology, we know a lot about injuries. We actually are very careful with our diagnosis and our terminology as pathologists. So we'll sometimes review cases from hospitals where someone lived, or maybe they died, but the hospital documentation lists injuries wrongly. Like there's a word laceration, which it's a big, long medical word, and it really means tear. So there's a tear, and it's a blunt force injury. So something hits the body or the body hits something. But we'll see in the medical records, say someone has a stab wound of their chest or 2 stab wounds in their chest. The medical records might say there are 2 lacerations of their chest. And it's not the right word, it's not the right description. So we will then help review that and help document the right terminology. Gunshot wounds, we can tell something about what happened based on the appearance of the injury, because we know what comes out of a weapon and marks the skin, whether it's a bullet or bullet and gunpowder. So we can get an idea about that based on a careful examination of the injury. Suicide, again, is when someone causes their own death. I put the note in there just to remind me to tell everyone. Sometimes we hear from families that it's not a suicide because they didn't write a note. Something must have happened. But really only about 15 or 20% of the people write notes. So it just happens. People die by suicide the same way they might die accidentally or homicidally. It's just that they caused it themselves. Undetermined is the manner of death when we can't classify the manner more likely than not. So our burden for any of these classifications or determinations is more likely than not. Undetermined doesn't usually mean we have no idea what happened. It usually means there's something competing. So this is someone's death scene. The man was dead at the bottom of the cliff, and the cause of death is no problem because he had all kinds of injuries from the going down. So the cause of death is multiple blunt force injuries, and we find alcohol in the blood. So the circumstances or classifying the manner is what we need to do. And it turns out that that man commonly went to that cliff and had whiskey and watched the sun go down. And again, he had alcohol in his blood. So maybe he got too close to the edge and was a little tipsy and toppled over, and it's an accidental death. But the same man a week before had a personal relationship dissolve. And some of his friends said they thought he was suicidal, that he was couldn't deal with the breakup. And he could have gone over on purpose. If we can't say more likely than not, one or the other, then we'll classify the manner of death as undetermined. We'll still give the cause of death, whatever it was, the blunt force injuries in his case, but we may give the manner of death as undetermined. So what do? Forensic means debate or for public debate. So forensic pathology is practicing medicine or pathology for documentation for whatever it may be needed for. Again, we're part of the public safety group, and we're separate from other agencies, and we're here for all parties. And I used to have on there, we're here, it's free. And in fact, we are provided by the government as a service to people. One can hire a private autopsy company and may have to pay $10,000 or $20,000 for an autopsy. And here at the county, if one's needed for the government's purposes, it's free. There is a part of the government code that allows families to compel us to do an autopsy at their expense if one isn't required for the government's purposes. And so we're fully able to do that too. So we do that. Those are called family requested autopsies. And we do those, multiple a year. We recommend discussing, not like practicing with the pathologist or telling them what to say, but we recommend discussing findings with the pathologist before testimony, so we can know what issues there might be involved. We teach medical students and resident pathologists here. We contribute information to some state, I think some are state required and some are recommended. Things like the Elder Independent Adult Death Review Team, the Child Fatality Review Team, Domestic Violence Death Review Team. So we give information to all of those. We give information to the Drug Abuse Task Force or Methamphetamine Strike Force and Prescription Drug Abuse Task Force. M&M down there stands for mortality and morbidity. So if someone dies in a hospital and we did an autopsy for them, then we're able to feed that information that we learned back to the hospital, and they can discuss and sometimes make recommendations about changing care in the future, or if something at the hospital might have contributed to the death. So they'll use that. We have a diver death review team. We, again, with trauma deaths, if someone was a patient of our trauma system in the county, and we do an autopsy, then we'll feed the information back to the trauma system again so they can evaluate their care. We helped develop a strangulation protocol for domestic violence survivors. So live people that survived domestic violence, especially strangulation, there weren't a lot of successful prosecutions as felonies in those cases, because sometimes there isn't a skin mark, a skin injury, or sometimes it heals within days, and then the victim loves their assailant in days after that and don't want to press charges any longer. The difference between living through a strangulation and dying by strangulation is just time. So it's not any extra pressure necessarily, but how much time the pressure is applied. So the difference between living and dying is just, it may just be seconds sometimes. So strangulation is very, very serious, even if someone lives through it. So we worked with law enforcement and the district attorney to create better questions to help ask survivors of domestic violence. An important thing we've done here is our data is available to the public. So for years, we produced, for several years, we produced documents that were 100 and something pages that had graphs and charts and numbers of certain topics, explained in there. But then about 4 or 5 years ago now, we've made shorter reports. So like a cover summary that highlights some of the main topics like fentanyl overdoses or COVID deaths or other topics that are of interest. But we put our database on the county's data portal. So basic information about all deaths since 1997 are available to the public. Right now, they don't have the decedent's name or case number, but age, race, sex, cause of death, manner of death, some about circumstances, zip code where they died, and place where they died. So whether it's a home or a hospital or a jail or whatever, that the place is listed, but we don't list home addresses for reasonable exploitation of privacy of the survivors. But we're actually working towards having a new web page, hopefully within this next year, that is searchable by the decedent's name or case number, and it should be updated daily. So hopefully the citizens, the public, and the media will be able to get information about a death more rapidly. And again, this is all public information. So it's, it may seem like it's an invasion of privacy, but it's actually the people's right to have that information available. The people meaning the people of our state. Again, right now it's basic information, age, race, sex, cause of death, manner of death, location of death, that kind of thing. Some of the topics of interest are already divided out for people, like certain drug deaths. This happens to be traffic related fatalities. And that top bar there is not Suzuki 600 on Saturday morning after the bars close, motorcycle crashes. No, the top bar there is pedestrian struck by motor vehicle, which is the #1 traffic fatality in our county. The point of producing this information is to prevent future deaths or improve safety. So maybe we could see that a certain part of the town has a lot of these accidents and needs better traffic lights or better traffic enforcement. Or since the #2 cause of death for a homeless person in our county is pedestrian struck by motor vehicle, perhaps when there's homeless outreach going on, the information could be given to maybe if someone camps under the freeway overpass to go home, safely from above rather than walk on the freeway to get home, that kind of thing. The point being to increase safety in the future. Other things the medical examiner may do is in August 2020, we'd already seen an exponential increase in the number of fentanyl deaths. In the first week of August 2020, we saw more deaths from fentanyl than we had in an entire year, just 5 or 6 years before. So we first alerted the health department to distribute that information to all doctors and hospitals that may see people to recognize the possibility of a fentanyl overdose and then counsel people on watching out for that. And then even there was a kind of an ad hoc kind of task force or group put together with Health and Human Services for the county that produce warnings like this, and then even billboards and bus benches to get the message out that fentanyl is killing people, and it's just too dangerous. Of course, in the fine print at the bottom there, substance use disorder treatment is available for people, which is one of the main message for the county. But in this case, the message was to be much stronger, that fentanyl will kill people, and people have to watch out for that and not use it. So again, it's another thing the medical examiner can do to help the county. So I've talked about what is forensic pathology, medical legal death investigation, the difference between a coroner and a medical examiner, how we handle things in San Diego, some definitions of cause of death and manner of death, and what else we do besides just giving a death certificate. So I'm not exactly sure of the timing for the meeting today, how much time there is for question, but I can answer.
Dr. Campman, thank you so very much for this very comprehensive overview of the role of the medical examiner's office. I'm going to turn it over to, we have the time, whatever the time that the public and the board would like with you, as long as you're available for that.
Sure.
I have a bunch of questions or whatever, but I'm the executive
Okay.
officer. So I'm going to turn it over first to Chairperson Youngflesh. At this point, I do not have any requests from the public for comment. I will
Okay.
monitor that. So Chairperson Youngflesh, I'll turn it over to you to handle the CLERB members, and if any public requests come in, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Of course. Thank you. And thank you so much, Dr. Campman, for being here.
Sure.
That was very informative and interesting. We do have a couple requests from board members. I'm not sure who went first. I think Vice Chair Delaney, I know your hand's up, and then Board Member Pintar. Vice Chair?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Campman. I have
Sure.
a couple of questions about the coroner system.
Yep.
So then who would determine the manner of death, and how would their system do the autopsies and all that?
Yep. So the manner of death determination is made by the coroner or the sheriff, if the sheriff is the coroner.
Mhm.
Their autopsies are handled in different ways. Some locations, some counties hire contracted pathologists, to work by case, and some counties have county pathologists that work for the coroner, and then they give their autopsy findings to the coroner, and then the coroner uses those to help determine the cause of death and manner of death. So
And
when I trained, my fellowship was at Sacramento County, that is a coroner county, and
Mhm.
I was part of a pathology group that was contracted by the county. So we did our autopsies and gave those reports to the coroner, and then they used those to make the determination for the death certificate.
Okay, I have one other question. This is kind of a general question, but why would a doctor not be willing to sign a death certificate?
Yeah. We've heard they're worried about getting involved in some kind of malpractice claim, or they just don't want to be involved, or it's late in the day, and they don't want to be bothered. Sometimes it's just almost strange to us. Well, just giving a made-up example, someone with known terrible heart disease, they're being prescribed medicines by the doctor, they're being prescribed insulin by the doctor, and they're dead in their house, and they're 80-something years old. Their doctor says, "I don't know why they died," or "I can't think of why they died." And we think, well, we've not even met them, and we know 3 reasons why they could be dead. So that happens sometimes. And then, so the burden then falls on the county to then, bring the body in, do an examination, do laboratory testing. And we may even use the documentation from that person's own doctor to help determine the cause of death. So, yep.
Interesting. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Ms. Pintar?
Thank you, Chair Youngflesh. I have several questions that
Okay.
I really want to get to your role in investigating deaths in our jails.
Right.
Let me start here. When someone dies in custody, do you automatically send an investigator, and is that investigator present at the scene immediately when someone dies, say in the jails, for example?
Right, as soon as we're notified of the death, then we send an investigator,
And
right?
is that immediately? You're notified immediately, or how soon are you present when the body, for example, when the deceased is still at the place where they
Yes,
passed? Okay.
yes, yeah, unless they were transported to the hospital, but
And
yes,
and that's every time there's a deceased in one of the jails, someone dies in one of our jails, you are called and present, and then
Yes.
you conduct an examination.
right.
Okay, so like maybe 2 or 3 slides before the end, you showed us a slide of traffic deaths that you said, you know, you use this information to provide to the county.
Yep.
So they might use it to improve safety. So they have information about how these deaths occurred and how changes might be made to improve safety and prevent loss of life. Is that
Right.
okay?
Yes.
Do you collect that data for the deaths that are happening in our jails in such a way that it could be used to tell us, to inform the county, to inform the sheriffs about how to prevent loss of lives in our jails?
So for sure, we have information about deaths in custody, and people can request that, media request that. And so we can summarize cause and manner of death and basic information for the deaths in custody. Yes, and it's actually publicly available right now on the data portal. It won't have the person's name, but it's publicly available. Yeah.
You think that would be, thank you, I appreciate that. And I think that we should probably look at that as a board. Do you have a general sense of what you see most frequently, the cause of deaths in the jails? Is it overdose? Is it violence? What do you see most frequently? And so it'd help us inform, you know, how to prevent this from
Right.
happening.
I think in the last couple of years, so I don't have the numbers right here with me, but my sense is that we've had overdoses in the last couple of years. But the information, like those numbers, that information is available. So that need only be requested and we can give that.
One last question, Chair, if I may, and then I will. All right. You mentioned that all autopsy examination reports are available to the public. When someone dies in one of the jails and you perform an examination, how quickly is that information made available to their families, to their family members? Is that made available to their family members at the same time that it's made available to the public?
Yeah, so unless it's sealed, then the information is available. The family can call the day of the autopsy and get direct information from the pathologist right away, unless it's sealed, of course. And they can call at any time in the days or weeks or even months that the rest of the microscopic work or toxicology is being done. The family can get updates at any time, again, unless it's sealed.
I'm sure I should know the answer to this, but what requires it to be sealed?
It's a judge or a law enforcement agency,
Such as the sheriffs?
Such as the sheriffs, that requests that the information not be released, because I think that the general justification is that it might interfere with public release of the information could interfere with an investigation.
And that applies to the families even?
Right.
Okay.
If it's sealed, yeah. There are other, like in a general sense, other cases may be sealed, like if there's a minor that's a victim of a homicide, then their family can request that it be sealed without a judge. Yeah.
Thank you for your time tonight. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I appreciate you answering my questions.
Yeah.
And Mr. Ware.
Yes, thank you, Chair Young Flesh. Dr. Kempman, thank you very much, man. That was an awesome, very thorough, very educational report. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Along the same lines as Ms. Cantor, you mentioned with the fentanyl report, and you did a Kahan, or I don't know if your office did it, but it was a Kahan report that was done in regards to fentanyl.
Right.
And I'm thinking, obviously, that the deaths from fentanyl got to a certain point that everybody's doing all they can to get this message out. So I'm thinking along the same lines with, and I know you have to be objective in what you're doing, but I'm thinking along the same lines with, just from a professional standpoint, are you concerned about the number of in custody deaths coming from our jails here in San Diego? And if so, what will get us, get your office to the point to where you would want to do a Kahan for deaths in custody as well?
The Kahans are actually for the doctors out in the community, so it wouldn't be. There's not it's not centered just for the jail care. So yeah, it's a California Health Alert Network is what it is.
Okay, so professionally, thank you for correcting me that. Professionally, are you concerned with the number of in custody deaths that you're seeing come your way?
You know, we document every one that occurs and make sure that the information is available. But I just have to remain objective and neutral and not, not give opinions like that. I don't want to give a bias either way. So we'll certainly document what's happening and make that information available so that people can recognize and see that.
Thank you. Thank you again for the great report. I appreciate it. Oh, by the way,
Yeah.
I'm also in the education system and would like to know, are you or your colleagues available? I know you went to a school today. Are you available to come out and do talks like that?
We can and do. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
sure.
And Ms. Domingos?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for your very detailed presentation. I just have one question regarding the medical examiner's report.
Okay.
Once it is sealed, I believe Ms. Pintar addressed most of my questions. My biggest question is, once it is sealed, who determines, or what is the duration of when it's reopened? Because there has been several cases, particularly one, I believe, that actually went through this board where the family had access to no information, and it was over a year, and they were just seeking to gain closure. That was their biggest deal, to know what happened and how the person died. And they would not release the information. So what is that duration, especially when families are looking to gain closure?
Yeah. That is the agency that sealed it is the agency that will unseal it. So they have to give us direction that it can be unsealed. Oh, and there's, as far as I know, there's not a defined duration for that.
So you're saying if the investigation takes, I'm just exaggerating, because I've seen families wait up to 18 months or so.
Right.
So if it takes longer, that's what it's going to be. That agency is the one to determine. Is there no higher power where the family can go to and demand that be the information of how that person died be released? Do you have that info?
I should think that the family should be able to call even our department and ask why it's still sealed. And then we could try to find out from the agency why it still needs to be sealed, because maybe it doesn't need to be sealed anymore. And the seal just remained because of, it was placed on there and we haven't had notification to unseal it. So I think communication for starters. And it may be that, some cases just take a long time to close. So that may be involved at sometimes, but we would have to just look at each case and see for an individual case why it's still sealed and if it could be unsealed.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Ms. Kank?
I just have, I have a personal question. I have a friend that her son died on the street, and she has yet to, and this is going on almost a year now, and she has yet to find out the cause of his death. And she continuously calls, and it's not been determined yet.
So she should, when she calls, ask to speak with the pathologist. It may be that she's just called the reception desk and sees that the case doesn't have a cause of death listed in the system yet. But it may be that the pathologist knows the autopsy findings or suspects toxicology results, and they just haven't got all the test results yet. But for sure, the pathologist involved in the case knows what they're waiting for and knows what's going on. So that would be the best thing, is to not just call and see, ask what the cause of death is, but ask to speak with the pathologist. And they'll be able to give, an update of what they found at the autopsy, what they found the very day of the autopsy. And then there may be circumstances like someone is found down like on the streets, and we might have done a urine screen and found fentanyl and cocaine, but it may be taking the laboratory a while to confirm those test results. So it may be something just simple like that, and that could be easily answered with a phone call directed to the right place.
Thank you. But my next question is, why would the receptionist not advise her to ask for the pathologist?
Sorry to interrupt, but we, Sherry Hoffman with council, we need to stay on topic of the agenda item.
Okay.
Thank you, Sherry. And Bonnie, if Ms. Kank, unless you have something that's specific to this agenda item, then I'm going to move on to Mr. Parker. Mr. Parker?
Thank you, Chair Youngflush. I do not see any I don't see any requests for public comment. So with your permission and council's permission, may I ask some questions as well?
Yes.
Ms. Hoffman, is that all right?
Yes, I do see a member of the public, but I'll just take this time to remind that it's public comment.
Right.
While the public may ask questions, there's no obligation to answer those.
Okay,
yes, you may as well.
Your connection is pretty bad, but my understanding is that the public were to make their comments, which we're going to have them do if they show interest to do so. There's no requirement that Dr. Campman answer the questions. It's just a comment. That being said, I would like to move to just ask a couple of specific questions that I know are concerns on behalf of the public, and it's just some clarifications if that's okay. So, Dr. Campman, one of the things that's been touched on a little bit here, and I don't want to take up much more of your time, but because of the importance, there is seems to be I don't want to say substantial, but it seems that there is a delay with getting the cause and manner of death for cases specifically, perhaps resulting, possibly drug-related deaths. Is there an end? Like, what's the time frame that you tell families, and what is your expectation for proper staffing and whatnot to get these? What is your goal,
right,
as opposed to what currently is happening right now?
Yep. So our standard, our goal is 90% of our cases should have the cause and manner of death in 60 days. And in the last year or so, with the big increase in the number of drug deaths and a decrease in the toxicology laboratory staff, it just takes longer to do all the appropriate testing. I gave the example the other day of a shuttle bus from a parking lot into Disneyland. Is if you get there at 8 a.m. on a springtime weekend day, there may be 600 people in line, but the shuttle bus can only take 20 people at a time. And that's basically what's happened with some of the drugs of abuse toxicology testing. The majority, so we just did some of these numbers the other day. Almost 2/3 of our deaths have a cause of death within the first week. It's about 30-something% that have the pending cause of death that takes longer to determine. So we are working on increasing our laboratory staff, and we've already rehired. We had a toxicologist leave the department, but then come back. So we're starting to catch up, and I'm hoping we'll be back to normal soon.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I also want to clarify for members of the public and for members of the board, you touched on something about, I think Ms. Pintar asked, how soon or when you're notified. But to be clear, you're notified of a death by, let's say someone dies in custody, you're notified, you're supposed to be given immediate notification, a heads up by the law enforcement agency, but then you're on standby basically until they're ready for you to respond, until they clear away, they process their scene and then basically make a path to the person who's died. That could take several hours, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure that that was clear, that everyone knows that that's the process. In reference
Yep.
to,
I just want to add a little more. It's actually kind of common, say someone out, nothing to do with a jail, is dead in a house somewhere. We may know about it for several hours while the whatever investigating agency is, collecting evidence or needing to get a warrant or something like that. So the time between the death and when we're actually notified that it's time to respond could be several hours.
that is correct. And just to clarify for the public as well, the law enforcement agency is responsible for the scene, the actual scene, and the medical examiner's office is responsible for the body. No one is to touch, disturb, or anything to the person who's died once that person has died and it's been determined it's medical examiner jurisdiction, correct?
Correct.
All right, thank you. And then secondly, there's a lot of concern on the part of some of our board members and the public that natural deaths may not occur in a jail setting. And if there is a natural death, if I understand the concerns from the public, that there's a thought that there is neglect involved. As you may know, we only have jurisdiction over the sworn members of our department, something we're of the sheriff's department, something we're trying to change. But you kind of touched on it during your presentation, but can you address the neglect versus natural deaths? And your natural deaths can occur in custody, and if they do occur, is there neglect, and how does that work?
Right. So again, we're classifying the manner of death for the state's vital records for the public health. If someone dies of a natural death, they die of a natural death. If say someone dies of cervical cancer, cancer of the cervix, and they didn't go get their pap smears, and to find the cancer earlier. The death is still classified as a natural death due to cancer with no judgment about whether the person should have gone for care sooner, or say they did get a pap smear and their doctor, missed the diagnosis and then they developed cervical cancer and died. It's still a natural death caused by cervical cancer. And it's not part of the classification for the state vital records. The neglect deaths that I was talking about were mainly those caused by starvation of someone, like a very young person or a very old person that they're unable to care for themselves. And those are very rare.
Okay, and then in reference to, and again, I see two other board members, if I may just finish my trains of thought here. As far as second autopsies, some family members, everybody, as you mentioned in your presentation, has the ability, if they can afford it, in addition to the Colin Kaepernick Foundation that's now out there providing second autopsies for law enforcement related deaths. But as far as second autopsies, how does your office communicate with those doctors, and what information do you provide to them when they reach out to you?
Our reports, again, are public. So as soon as our reports are available, they can get the report as same as everyone else. Yep.
To include photographs?
Photographs by the coroner or medical examiner are protected by state law, and they can be gotten, but my understanding is there needs to be a court, a legal matter pending that then the family can get them for that.
So if there's a legal matter, if a family is suing the county, then there's a legal matter, right? So therefore that should be permissible. I know you're not an attorney and we can refer to attorneys, but I just want to make sure that everyone understands what your office can and cannot do. Sealed cases, we've talked about sealed cases. To be clear, The cause and manner of death of a sealed case is a public record because it's on the death certificate. The information about sealed cases is not going to be released, and it wouldn't be on your data portal, correct?
Correct.
And in reference to those sealed cases, just so everyone in the room knows that we had made a recommendation to the Sheriff's Department a couple of months back, and Acting Sheriff Martinez actually implemented it before our recommendation, apparently, that the Sheriff's Department was not going to, as a matter of routine, seal cases any longer. I'm hopeful that that continues under the watch of Sheriff Ray, that the information is continually provided to the public and to the family members, and that we don't go back to sealing cases unless there's a true, compromise that might happen to a criminal investigation that would result in homicide charges. And then finally, compassionate release. Folks who are, we've talked about, and you've talked about how you have in custody death data available, and you do. However, you have to have it categorized as in custody. If I remember your database, it had an in custody box. I don't know if it still is that way, but there may be some deaths that the incident started from in the custody of any detention facility or law enforcement, but they ultimately are either compassionate released or even die 6 months later, in a care facility outside of custody. Would you catch those deaths?
I believe we would, because the incident description would include that the incident happened while they were in custody.
What if it was a natural death, COVID related or something along those lines, where there was technically no incident giving rise to it? It was just an illness that happened. Would you be able to catch those deaths, you think?
Then that should be by the location. So if they died in a facility, a detention facility of some sort, that location of the death would be there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Campman. Chair Youngflesh, I don't have any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. I know we have a number of board members. I will call Ms. Domingos and then Mr. Wilson.
Chair Youngflesh, we do have one public member, if you'd like to go to public first. It's up to you.
Okay, sure. I know that public member has been waiting for a while, so I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll go back to the board members.
Thank you, Chair Youngflesh. Mr. Miller, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Youssef Miller with the North County Equity and Justice Coalition and the Saving Lives in Custody campaign. Doc, how would you classify the cause and manner for, again, a natural death or natural causes that are, for example, a heart attack if medication is withheld for that person or medication is insufficient for that person? Or, for example, they didn't get their stroke medication or seizure medication, or they're diabetic and get a fraction of the dose. What would be your cause of death related to staff neglect in this manner?
Yep. So those deaths would generally be classified based on the disease. So they would be generally natural deaths. So if someone died from diabetes, they died from diabetes. If there could have or should have been a different dosing or a different administration, that would be a matter for a court to decide.
And if that was the public comment, then I'll move back to the board members. Mr. Parker, do I have any other public comment?
You do not.
Okay, then I will go back to Ms. Domingos.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I do have two questions, so please bear with me. You spoke about neglect, so let me backtrack. So you said natural death. So on the report, the due to of the natural cause of death, is it always stated on the report? Because my understanding was it was just death due to natural causes.
No, the cause of death is given. Yeah, the disease that
Did you
caused
hear
the
me?
death. Yes. The disease that
Am I
caused
frozen?
a little bit.
Ms. Domingos, so we can hear you just
Can you
fine,
hear
Ms.
me?
Domingos. Yeah,
Yeah.
Ms. Domingos, we can hear you just fine. Dr. Campman, go ahead.
Yeah, the disease that caused the death will be listed on the cause of death. Yeah, so it won't just say natural. Yeah, because we can't just say natural. We have to give the actual cause.
Ms. Domingos, did you hear
Well,
us
due
respond?
to, so can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Sorry, I was frozen for a second. So you said the natural cause will always state due to whichever disease process was, involved, correct?
Yes.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. So that alleviates my concern because short of somebody being 99 years old and the heart stopping just because it was really old and those muscles lose their strength, I couldn't see anybody just dying naturally. So that takes care of that. Neglect. This is also another issue I struggle with every time I read a case that has certain words. And for me, I call them my buzzwords. You spoke about neglect, which could be due to starvation. When you say starvation, are you also referring to terms like gravely disabled, when somebody is like mentally ill, where they are not able to, they are physically strong enough, but they just are so depressed, they do not want to feed themselves and have no will to live? Or do you mean starvation because that person was deprived of nutrients while in custody?
It would be deprived of nutrients.
While in custody, correct?
Well, anywhere, out in their house, anywhere. Yeah.
Okay, so my main focus, so let me just be clear. My main focus is behind, in custody while they're in, yeah. So another thing I have questions about neglect. So you mentioned the drug overdoses, and I'm glad you mentioned that in your report. And I love the incentive from the county. I just also wanted to understand if any person in custody that dies of a drug overdose, is that also considered neglect? Because technically, the person is supposed to be searched and stripped before they're booked, meaning they technically shouldn't have access to drugs. So if they die of a drug overdose, like 2 weeks after being in custody, is that neglect?
Right. So we just classify the death according to the injury or illness. So if someone died from an overdose, then we don't make a judgment about should they not have taken the drug, should they not have access to the drug. We just classify the death as being due to the drug. And if they shouldn't have taken it or they shouldn't have had it available, then that's a matter for the courts or someone else to decide. So we'll just certainly classify what happened, that they died from an overdose, but we won't make a judgment about could they or should they have or anything like that.
Fair enough. Then I have two last questions based on neglect, because these are also cases that I see. Is somebody who comes in, makes it known that they're suicidal, somehow dies by suicide, is that considered neglect?
No, we'll classify that death as a suicide. Yep.
Last question regarding neglect. Somebody comes in, makes it known that they have been using a certain substance. Let's choose the classical alcohol. Easy enough to access, it is legal. If somebody says, my last drink was an hour ago, I just had 2 bottles before I was arrested, and that person ends up dying because of because it's about 96 hours before withdrawals kick in. And then you have yes. So if that person dies from those withdrawals, because alcohol withdrawal is the one thing that will definitely kill someone, is that considered neglect, or is it still written person died of,
right.
alcohol withdrawal?
Yeah, so it would be the cause of death would be the alcohol withdrawals, and it would be classified like that. Again, not making a judgment about should something else have happened or should they have not consumed alcohol or anything like that. So we'll classify the cause and manner of death for the state's public health records. But if somebody wanted to pursue, another
Legal
explanation,
actions, that
would be separate.
Your bailiwick.
Yeah, separate from the state's determination for the death certificate.
Okay, so all you just do is determine cause of death And that is it. And you're saying that your medical examiner's reports are pretty much black and white. You're looking at organ systems, looking at what failed or the trauma to that organ system, and that's all you're putting in your reports, deeming it, you had your classifications, natural causes due to homicide, and then neglect is really if somebody was literally starved to death behind bars.
And not just behind bars, but yes. So yeah.
I'm just focused to.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. So
Yes.
yeah, we're there to objectively document the condition of the body and the diseases that cause the death. And then classify overall the circumstances into one of those 5 groups according to the public health standards. You're correct in your summary.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Wilson.
Dr. Catman, thank you for coming tonight. Been very, very interesting.
Sure.
What happens when the sheriff does not agree with your findings? How do you resolve that? And you sort of have a high noon standoff, and who has the last call?
Well, our determinations are separate. So our determination will be on the death certificate. And it may be that there's, maybe the sheriff just disagrees. I do remember a series of news articles one time where the sheriff disagreed with our findings, and that's all right. We're separate, we're independent. And it's not unusual for people to disagree with our findings, so, in any legal system, there are 2 sides, and often one side won't like what we say. So we're objective and we're separate, and people can disagree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Delaney.
Thank you, Dr. Campman. I have one more question. Actually, it's kind of a series of questions. So if an autopsy is sealed, during that time that it's sealed, can the family have their own autopsy done?
Of course.
Okay.
So the body can be released as soon as we're done with the autopsy.
Okay.
And that happens. So the body may go, away from here, and our death certificate says pending, until we get our laboratory studies, but the family can have their own autopsy, by a company. Yeah.
Okay. So the sealing has nothing to do with them doing theirs. Okay. Thank you.
No, it's just sealing our report from
Okay.
public release. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. And then Ms. Domingos, did you have another question?
Yeah, really quickly sorry, I don't have my camera on. Really quickly to the fact that the families can have their own autopsy done. I think that's great. My biggest question is, are there any costs involved?
Yes. So the family requested autopsy. So if we did one already, then the private companies do charge, and what they charge varies. If one is not required for the government's purposes, and so we didn't do one, then there's the county, there is a fee for that, and it's a break-even fee. It's not a profit fee, and I think it's around $3,900 and something dollars. That's if they wanted the county to do it, but the private companies are probably more.
And I don't see any other hands. Mr. Parker, do we have any other?
Yes,
public?
we have 2 hands. Actually, we had 2. Now we only have 1. Yep, now we have 2. And Dr. Campman, just so you know, both of these folks that are going to speak have lost loved ones. The first one I'm going to go to is Jennifer Schmidt. Jennifer's father, Gilbert Gill, died in February of this year, and so I'm going to call on her right now. Miss Schmidt, are you there? Ms. Schmidt? Jennifer Schmidt, are you there? Okay, I'm sure she's there. There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Jennifer. Go ahead.
Okay. I have a question about the natural causes. So say my dad goes in there and doesn't get his insulin because the nurses failed to give it to him. How is that not neglect?
Again, if the person died because of
And
diabetes.
my dad did die.
Right, no, of diabetes, then we would list the cause and manner of death as the diabetes, the disease that caused the death. And we won't make a judgment about, whether.
Well, I know diabetes is why he died. I just had a question about that. And the other thing is about the independent autopsies. I did get a second autopsy done by the Autopsy Initiative.
Right.
And I know there's places out there like that, and it was absolutely free.
Yep. Oh, good.
So it was wonderful. And I know most of them, we called other ones and they were like $1,800 for.
Well, that's great. What's the name of that group? Autopsy or
Independent autopsies.
no? What's the name of the
Autopsy Initiative is through Colin Kaepernick.
And is that only for people that die in custody?
Yes.
Okay, because people
Or-
actually want them for other purposes too. So okay.
It's not for just in custody. It's anything to do with the police. So shootings or just in custody.
Okay. Well, that's good. Thank you for telling me that. That's good to know.
I just want to thank you for doing the autopsy and getting it done. I just wish information would come a whole lot sooner.
Yeah.
I can't sleep at night. It's been 90 days almost, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, Ms. Schmidt, thank you, and my condolences, ma'am. Next, we will go to Sunday Weddle. Sunday is Saxon Rodriguez's mother, and again, we're not really supposed to talk about the specifics, right? But I know that Sunday is here, and Sunday, your time starts now, man.
Hello, I wanted to ask specifically about time of death. Saxon was pronounced dead at 10:23 a.m. And that is the time that's specified on his autopsy report. However, Saxon was dead before that time. And I'm just wondering if the medical examiner tries to find the actual time of death. Is there a specific time frame within? Is it like minutes, hours, as close to his death as possible? I do believe that he laid there for some time deceased before he was found. And I think that's important information for myself to know when my son actually passed. So I was just wondering if you could give me some specifics surrounding that.
Yeah. So in our county and in much of the state, we don't make a guess about a time of death. So a death will either be listed as when someone is found or when they're declared dead, like if they were having resuscitative efforts and ongoing and they're declared dead because there's a medical person present. And part of that, or the main part of that, is because there's not a scientific way to determine with any certainty when someone died. It's not at all like on TV where, on NCIS where Ducky walks up and says, oh, it was 10:45, like that. There isn't a way to do that. There are some changes with the body that can be used to estimate how long someone's been dead in a broad way, because, everybody will undergo these changes. So everybody will have a stiffness that happens and color changes that happen. And those happen in predictable ways, but not at exactly the same speed in everyone. So our investigators do make observations about those changes with the bodies. So we might be able to make an estimate, but they're just broad estimates and not very accurate. So that's why the cause of death is listed as when they're found or when they're determined dead. So so there may be a way to give a little better estimate, but not a way to determine, with reasonable certainty.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron, and thank you, Ms. Weddle. Saxon's case will be deliberated by the CLERB on June 14th. So that's where we stand. At this point, Chair Youngflesh, I do not see any additional public comments. I do not see any board comments. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, again, thank you, Dr. Campman, for being here and taking a great amount of your evening to go through that thorough presentation and answer all of our many questions. Sure. We surely appreciate it and appreciate your time and the work that you do. Thank you again.
Sure. My purpose, for being here was to give that information so people have a better understanding about what we do. So I'm glad.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron.
Well, we are too. Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. And for our next agenda item, we're going to go out of order because we do have Jim Sandler, who is our prior counsel here. And so we do not keep him waiting. I would like to call that agenda item, which is listed as, I believe it's
7B. Chair Youngflesh.
7B. And I would turn that over to you, Mr. Parker.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all so very much. Jim, thank you for being here. Just so everyone knows, and I'm not going to be able to do this justice, but Jim Sandler has been CLERB's outside counsel since CLERB was formed, in the early 90s. Jim has done, he didn't get rich doing this work, that's for sure. But Jim has navigated CLERB through all of the beginning court cases that justified our existence, that allowed for arrangements to be made with the Sheriff's Department on how to get information. You name it, Jim has been at the forefront of navigating CLERB through these court cases. And CLERB is what it is today because of Jim's efforts. I would like to, Jim is retiring, and after all of these years, the wealth of knowledge that he has about civilian oversight, considering that that's not his area of expertise, that's not what his law practice was about. He is the expert, at least in my opinion, and in the state for civilian oversight, and has guided me during my tenure as executive officer, tried to guide me during my first tenure as executive officer, and I really much appreciate all of his efforts. I would like to read from a previous executive officer who couldn't be here tonight, but wanted to make sure that his thoughts about Jim were read into the record. And it's from previous executive officer John Parker, no relation to me, but John and Jim worked very closely to get CLERB pretty much established. And so John says, "Dear Jim, it's with great respect that I write in honor of your retirement as CLERB's contracted independent counsel. In fact, you were CLERB's independent counsel when I was hired to be executive officer in May of '97, and lasted not only to my retirement in 2007, but you're now just stepping away in 2022. That is a testament to your legal acumen and integrity in general, but moreover to your dedicated work for the board. Your service to the board has been invaluable throughout the years, and I have never forgotten how important your extraordinary legal work, counsel, and most of all, your friendship was to me. I'm positive that the same applies to most of my successors. Thank you, Jim, for your dedication and loyalty to CLERB for so many years. I join the current board and staff in wishing you a well-earned retirement. Godspeed, my friend. Warmest regards, John Parker." And obviously, I echo John's sentiments. This is a loss. This is a loss, but I can only thank you for what you've done. You're not in person. I hope this shows up. The least we can do, you do 30 years of service and we get you this plaque. That's the best I can do. I'll have to meet you, give it to you over coffee. It says, "With our greatest appreciation, presented to James G. Sandler. Thank you for 30+ years of dedicated counsel and service to the San Diego County Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board, April 2022. Jim, thank you so very, very much. With that, I'll turn it over to you if you have any words that you'd like to impart.
Well, that's really nice, Paul. Thank you. Thanks to John. Thanks to all of you. It's been a great honor to be part of CLERB since CLERB was formed, to go through the creation of the rules and regulations, all the litigation which challenged CLERB's existence, the troubles caused by the court decisions, which put CLERB underground for so much of its existence. But to see the fine work that CLERB has done and all the members of the board over the years, and particularly now when the issues regarding the sheriff's department and the jail deaths are so important to the community, to see how great it is that you're trying to shed light on what's going on and to be part of the seemingly move in the direction of the state toward allowing civilian oversight to come out from the shadows and to be more visible. It's wonderful, and I congratulate all of you. It's been an honor to work with CLERB over the years, and I will look forward to observing what you do and how you do it, and to see the great progress you'll make. You have wonderful leadership, and bright days are ahead. Thank you very much. I'm touched by what you said and what John said, and we'll look forward to that coffee and getting that plaque. Thank you.
Will do, sir. Chair Youngflesh?
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Sandler. I think I speak on behalf of CLERB. I couldn't say more than what Paul and what the prior CEO said, but we really do appreciate all your work and your knowledge, and you'll be greatly missed. And I always thought attorneys never retired, so maybe we can coax you back out of retirement, because I think you'd always have a place here if you're bored, like to come back and join the good fight. I know that you'd always have a place. So, but you always have a place with public comment nonetheless. So hopefully you'll join us for that.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that very much.
Right. Thank you, Jim. And it would be appropriate, Sherry or Mr. Parker, if any other board members would like to say anything at this time.
I think that's appropriate unless Ms. Hoffman overrules me.
Definitely appropriate.
Would any other board members like to comment? Okay. Well, then again, Mr. Sandler, thank you so much for all your time and effort and your wealth of knowledge that you brought to the board. And we wish you all the best in retirement.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you to all of you.
Susan, I'm sorry, can I jump in and
of
say
course.
something? Just on behalf of County Council, want to thank you, Jim, for your service and jumping in when we're not able to. And beyond that, just the incredible history you had with CLERB. I know you've gone through a few of us attorneys who've advised CLERB. It was always incredibly helpful to have you give us the history and the context of everything, and you'll be missed tremendously by our office.
Thank you, Sherry. It's been a pleasure to work with you and with your colleagues.
Right.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And then, Mr. Parker, I believe I'm turning the floor back over to you for the executive officer's report, which is agenda item 5.
I'll do my best to do this rather quickly. First and foremost, I wanted to introduce Valerie Zagal. Valerie is our new Administrative Secretary 3. She has 15 years of service with the county. She comes to us from the Health and Human Services Agency, where she was an Administrative Secretary 2. So this is a promotion for her. She started with us yesterday. She's got her work cut out for her. I was looking for someone that could take us to the next level, to get our administrative ship in order, and then work with me and our future analysts that we're going to be getting in July to move forward and to make CLERB as administratively efficient as possible, responsive to the community, update our website, have our intake processes, more customer service oriented, things along those lines. So this is Valerie. I don't want to put you on the spot, Valerie, but here she is. And if Val, if you want to say a word or two, great. If not, that's great too.
Sure. Yes. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Yes. Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you for that intro. And I just want to let you all know it's a pleasure to meet you. And I am honored to be a part of this meeting. This is my first board meeting with you all. So this is all new to me. I do come from the Health and Human Services Agency. So this looks a lot different than my previous scope of work, but I am here and I'm motivated and I'm eager to learn all about what you guys do. And just bear with me, be patient with me as I learn the ropes of this new role, but I'm excited and I'm happy, and feel free to ask me any questions at any given moment. I'm here to support and happy to help. Thank you.
Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you.
Look, I think it's pretty obvious right now. I mean, it's going to be a very good fit. We're going to be good moving forward. As far as her training, right? It's going to be me and Lynn. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do the best we can. But she comes to us with a lot of strengths already that we're going to, we're going to look to her to kind of tell us what we're doing and how we can do things better. So Valerie, thank you so very much. Enjoy your meeting right now because it's the last one you're not really going to have to do much at. So thank you. All right. So with that, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mingos.
Valerie, I just wanted to say thank God and welcome. Paul has been drowning. And hopefully you can help push him back up and get this back on the road. So thank you so much.
Yes, that is the mission, and we are gonna make that happen for sure.
Mr. Mingos is telling the truth. Yeah, so she's right on the money. So thank you. All right, Valerie, thank you so very much. Moving on with the executive officer report. Unfortunately, I have to report to you that William Graham is no longer one of our special investigators. Mr. Graham did a good job while he was here. Unfortunately, he has decided that he wants to take another job and go in a different direction for the second half of his career. So that's where we are at this point. We've already started the recruitment process. So that leaves us obviously short. It leaves his caseload that's going to be primarily inherited by Lynn. And then some of those cases will be divvied up with the other investigators. But I want to work with the county to hire as quickly as possible. We have a lot of important work to do, serious work to do. We have to get fully staffed. We have to be able to keep some folks that we're bringing on. And I'll do the best I can to look at what I'm doing, and get us where we need to be. So that's that. On April 12th, I met with a representative from Supervisorial District 1 to discuss the process for filling their CLERB member vacancy. On April 21st, I attended a joint San Diego Police Commission on Police Practices and Community Advisory Board meeting to discuss the newly implemented countywide memorandum of understanding signed by the San Diego Police Chiefs and Sheriff regarding protocols for the investigation and review of officer and deputy involved shootings and other deadly force. We'll talk more about this under item 7C. On April 26th, CLERB hosted its third virtual town hall, which pertained to CLERB's independent commission report from Analytica. We'll talk more about this as well under 7C. The town hall obviously was well attended, informative, provided community members a forum to express their concerns, which is what the whole point was. On May 4th, I presented the CLERB's 2022-2023 operational plan to the Chief Administrative Officer, Helen Robbins-Meyer, and the Finance and General Government Group, with much assistance from Zhang Myers, who's on the call right now, from the Finance and General Government Group, getting me ready and getting me prepared for that presentation. I much shout out to her. I'll be making that presentation. The Board of Supervisors has selected CLERB as one of the departments it wants to hear from during the budget discussions on May 20th. So I'll be there on May 20th. That's a Friday afternoon to do the same op plan presentation. Once I present it to the Board of Supervisors, I will present it to you folks at the June meeting. On May 4th, I met with the division of the San Diego Sheriff's Department Division of Inspection Services personnel and newly promoted Homicide Bureau personnel to discuss the existing death scene response MOU. Just ways we could maybe make it a little bit better, just kind of lessons learned from the first, I've been to basically 10 scenes, 2 deputy involved shootings and 8 in custody deaths, maybe 7, 8 at the time, so 10 scenes. So we have some experiences that we worked through and that we'll continue to work through to make the civilian oversight entities' role in these death investigations as transparent and as accessible as possible. And the department's open to doing so. The next day, met with Sheriff Ray himself, in addition to folks from the Division of Inspectional Services with them as well. The point of meeting with the sheriff, a couple of things. Number one, I wanted to make sure he knew right from CLERB what we're working on. Why we're putting all these recommendations forward, that our priorities, of course, are what our case investigations are, of course, but also about the deaths in custody, about the racial disparities that some reports have indicated that have occurred, about the transparency and communication with families and the public and the community's perceived lack of that happening, which is why Dr. Campman came here tonight. So I expressed those things to Sheriff Ray. He was extremely responsive to me. He said, I offered the invite to come to our meeting, and he is more than willing to do so. We'll get him on the calendar for a future meeting. I do know that in previous meetings with Assistant Sheriff Adams Hyder, that she too was willing to come. We'll have to reach back out to her to talk about if she's willing to do so. I know she expressed an interest in doing so, so we'll talk more about that at a later point. But right there, you have the two people responsible for the department and the deaths, not the deaths, detention facilities, the deaths occurring in the detention facilities, trying to get a handle on that situation. They've expressed a willingness to discuss and to be open with CLERB. So I also wanted to make sure that everyone understood that last at the town hall, there was a speaker who talked about how their loved ones were not communicated with when an inmate was taken to the hospital, and it was all about organ and tissue donation. The sheriff was made aware of that situation and is committed to me that he'll do everything he can to increase the transparency and communication with families as well. In addition, our hope is that cases will not continue to be sealed, or as we mentioned earlier during Dr. Campman's, we talked about that a little bit, about how we hope that the community will continue to be given information and not routinely seal cases of folks who have died in custody. In reference to those death cases, we have 2 death cases that are just about completed and will be on June's agenda, and that's for Damasceno, Alamos, and Saxon Rodriguez. They will be on next month. That's what we've been working on internally. As far as CLERB's rules and regulations 5.8, you'll see it's on the agenda tonight. To be clear, so the public knows, CLERB itself, if someone terminates employment, resigns, or retires as a subject officer in a case after we get the complaint, but before our investigation is completed, CLERB has to tell me to have staff terminate the investigation or not. So I want to make sure the public knows that and the board's aware of that. And we have an item on the agenda for tonight for that very topic. I have 0 vacancy updates for CLERB member. We saw D1, D2, and D3. I have nothing to add to that. As far as the investigative workload, which is attachment B, there were 15 new cases in April, as opposed to 12 for last year. April, 7 cases on tonight's agenda to include 3 death cases and 1 great bodily injury case. We had 85 open cases at the end of the month, 31 open death cases, 3 of them again on tonight's agenda, 14 open uses of force cases. And these are cases without signed complaint. So I want everyone to also see the majority of our cases at this point are not routine cases. They are cases that are the priority cases: death, great bodily injury, use of force, whatnot. Really not much to discuss about the status reports. You'll see that we're making progress on the priority cases. I sent, because of the activity and everything that we have going on, I sent no communications or correspondence to the full CLERB, did not send media articles. There's an issue about the media articles and the board members not having access because they're behind a paywall. That's a topic that needs to be addressed in some form or fashion. We will look to do that in the near future, perhaps even putting that item. I've been working with counsel, so I'd like to work with counsel, to continue to work with counsel on that issue before moving forward to bring it to the full board, but hopefully we can get some resolutions soon. That being said, there are 19 policy recommendations that we have put forward to the respective departments, 16 at the Sheriff's Department, 3 for the Probation Department. 1 response did come in yesterday prior to I could put it on the agenda, but since it's part of the EEO report, it'll be on next month's agenda, but it's for case number 21038, where we recommended that the department, the Sheriff's Department, use body scans, that they be completed to include inmates transferred between facilities. And for next month's agenda, but again, part of the EEO report, because it's part of it, the Sheriff's Department does not feel that this recommendation can be accommodated at this time. The number of facility transfers, inter-facility transfers would drastically slow down. Current staff levels will not allow for them to implement the change safely, effectively, and efficiency, which is the reasons it's not feasible at this time. So hopefully the department, with the funding and personnel, whatever, can get to a point where they can implement something along those lines. So that is that. And then I'd like to, as part of the executive officer report, make it very clear that Brian Barnum is no longer our supervising probation officer liaison. He got promoted. So right now we have 2, we have Brian Berry with the Probation Department, who introduced himself last month. And where did he go? I just saw him a minute ago. Brandon Abreu is our new liaison with the probation department. And if it's permissible, Brandon, if you want to just say a word or two to introduce yourself.
Thank you, sir. My name is Brandon Abreu. I've been with the probation department for 20 years. I have experience in juvenile institutions, training, adult supervision, AB 109, specifically PRCS, post-release community supervision and mandatory supervision. And I recently, as Mr. Parker said, now I'm in internal affairs and backgrounds. So just anything, I'm here to just help with anything, and anything I can do to help CLERB, I'm here for everyone. So I really have nothing specific, just that I'm here to help.
Thank you so very much. Welcome aboard. I know they'll be working with you and Supervising Probation Officer Berry in having the new Chief Probation Officer perhaps make a presentation to the CLERB in the next month or two. So I'll be working with you on that. And there are some policy recommendations that are outstanding that we'll work on. And that's where we are. And I thank you very much. I wish you nothing but the best. Thanks for joining CLERB, or thanks for being the CLERB liaison.
Thank you.
All right. We do have 3 responses finally. Final part of my EO report, 3 responses on 15 finding recommendations that we made to the department. All 3 are part of your attachment, and all 3 were forwarded to the respective employees' chain for appropriate disposition. With that, Chairperson Young-Flesh, that concludes my executive officer report. I can open it up for any comments or questions.
Okay. I don't see any comments. Do we have any okay, I do. Kind of went up at the same time, so I'll call on Mr. Ware.
Thank you, Chair Young-Flesh. Mr. Parker just had a question on what's the procedure for us to get either Commander Hyde or Adams, and or also the sheriff on board to come before CLERB. In all due respect, I'm normally big on leadership. I am big on leadership, but in this case, we're working with an interim sheriff. So I would, from a priority standpoint, would like to have Commander Hyder, from a priority standpoint, to come before CLERB and address the questions and concerns, and also the positive things that are happening in the sheriff department. I think she would do a great job in that area. So what's the procedure for us, and how soon can we make that happen?
The procedure would be for me to work with Sergeant Brayman and Lieutenant Greenewald at the Division of Inspectional Services. I'll make that formal request to them tomorrow. I mean, they're on the call right now. They know that it's coming, and we'll work with them and see when they would be available to attend.
Thank you.
Ms. Pintar?
Yes, Paul, I don't know that you addressed this or not, and if you did and I didn't catch it, I apologize. But just wanted to talk, did you address the policy recommendations pending responses?
I didn't address them individually. I just said that there were 16 for the sheriff, 3 for probation, and that the one that was received was in reference to the body scanning between facilities that was not going to be implemented.
Okay, sorry, you did go over them quickly. I just would like to know if we can get a sense of when we're going to get responses to these. I mean, how many of them are we looking at now that we've been making these recommendations for the past several months? And I just feel like, I don't know, we should have a response on some of these by now. It's been a long time, and there's a lot of them, and they're important, and there's no response yet.
Well, to that point, if I may, 14 were made last month. So normally we only make about 12 a year. We did 14 last month, and out of those 14, I think all but 2 went to the sheriff's department. So the ones that are outstanding, so they then would only have 2 more that have been in the queue for a little longer than last month. So I've worked with Sergeant Brayman almost daily about updates and whatnot, and I know for a fact she's assured me that they're being reviewed. They're in the process up the chain of command. So I've hoped to have some resolution for those 2 that have been outstanding, but the other 14, we gave them a lot, and I will be Sergeant Brayman and I'll be working together, and she knows I can be a pain about it. I'll continue to do that.
I didn't realize only 2 had been outstanding for longer than last month, so that's fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Wilson?
Mr. Parker, 2 items. I concur with Mr. Ware regarding getting Commander Haidar to come in and tell us about some of the positive actions she's doing in the jail. She's only been there, I think, what, 2 months with the responsibility of overseeing the detention facilities. So I'd like to, I really urge you to get with her and provide her the opportunity to give us a little insight in what she's doing. And the second thing, you brought up the issue of immediately sealing by the Sheriff's Department deaths investigations. I think that's moved in the right direction, but what do we do to keep that on the front burner and to reinforce with the sheriff that we think that that's the right thing to do?
To answer your first question, Assistant Sheriff Haidar is, when I met with her 2 months ago, she was very open to attending a CLERB meeting. I felt that, let her get her feet wet, right? Let her kind of settle in a little bit. Well, that time is now upon us, I think. I think it's fair that we work with the DIS to get her and the sheriff here. And I don't see why that wouldn't happen. So that's number one. In reference to the sealing of the cases, the only thing that we can do is to continue to, for me, to continue to monitor, what we're given and what we're not, and what's truly going on, what's being presented to the public. And if I see that all of a sudden there's this routine sealing of cases again, in violation, not violation, but in direct conflict with what Acting Sheriff Martinez implemented at the time and what our policy recommendation is, I'll bring it back to the board. I mean, I'll go to the department first and say, here's what we see, what's up, and then I'll report back to you folks and the public.
Thank you.
And Mr. Ware? Oh, your hand went down.
It's just one last comment, just to my colleagues out there on the board and the public. I just believe Dr. Campman set the bar high, and that bar should be set high for public officials, public leaders to come before this board and be as transparent with a vision and answering these questions that he did today. That's the bar. That's the bar, and I'm hoping our other public officials and leaders are seeing that today.
Thank you. And I don't see any other board member comments or questions for Mr. Parker, nor do I see any public comments or questions. So I'm moving on then to agenda item number 6. I don't have anything to add in the board chair's report other than I'd like to welcome the new board probation department liaisons. We look forward to working with you. Moving on then to agenda item number 7, which is new business. 7A is the continuance of teleconferencing meeting option pursuant to Government Code Section 54953, subsection E. Again, we do this on a monthly basis so that we can continue the teleconferencing option in a virtual platform. I know that there's certain language that must be made in order to make this motion. I see that Vice Chair Delaney has raised her hand. I'm assuming that is in order to make the motion. And she is signifying yes.
Correct. Yes.
Before I see Mr. Wilson is willing to second the motion, I would ask that council read that specific language that she would like us to have in the motion so I don't misquote it.
Thank you. So the appropriate motion would be to find that CLERB has reconsidered the circumstances of the state of emergency, and state and local officials continue to recommend measures to promote social distancing.
Thank you, council. So we have a first by Vice Chair Delaney, a second by Mr. Wilson. Do we have any board discussion from the board, or can I go ahead and move to the vote? Seeing no discussion, I would ask Mr. Parker to call the vote.
Chair Youngflesh,
Yes.
Vice Chair Delaney,
Yes.
Ms. Domingos,
Here, yes, sorry.
Ms. Keen Ayub.
Yeah.
Ms. Kank,
No.
Ms. Pintar,
Yes.
Mr. Ware,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-1.
Thank you. We've already discussed agenda item 7B, which is the recognition of James Sandler. So moving on to 7C, the debrief CLERB Town Hall, CLERB Independent In Custody Death Data Report by Analytica Consulting. And I do believe Mr. Parker was going to address this issue.
Thank you, Chair Youngflesh. We had the town hall. Obviously, everyone knows that we had the independently commissioned study from Analytica, and it had those 7 findings. In addition, it had 15 areas for further research or further study that they recommended. We had the town hall, they presented their findings, and this is an opportunity for CLERB to direct me for anything that CLERB would want me to do. I do, I want to make sure we remember, and I failed to do so, to open it up to public comment before this item. I don't see any public comment. So at this point, I'll just turn it over. If based on that town hall and the report, CLERB would like me to do something, now's the time. Chair Youngflesh.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Delaney, I see that your hand's up.
Yes, I thought it was a very productive town hall, and I would like to ask the board and make a motion that we request funds to have Analytica Consulting do a follow-up study on the whys. Why does San Diego have the highest in custody death rates, and how these deaths can be avoided?
And it's seconded by Mr. Wilson. I would open the floor if there's any discussion. Seeing no discussion, then I would ask Mr. Parker to please call the roll.
Chair Youngflesh.
Yes.
Ms. Delaney.
Yes.
Ms. Domingos.
I apologize. I was having a glitch. I did want to comment. So there was a discussion.
Ms. Hoffman, since we're in the middle, if you can forgive me for 1 second, Ms. Domingos, procedurally, Ms. Hoffman, since we started calling for the vote, but Ms. Domingos had a glitch and was unable to comment, how should we go about this?
She can comment and then we can redo the vote.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Domingos?
Sorry about that. So I think it's a great idea. I just want to know to what end is the funds for the research. I believe we have had different entities do research and have established a point. I just don't know what the use of this is and how it's going to help solve the issue of the deaths that are rising. It's just another study that will help, in my opinion, magnify the issue that we're currently having now on a weekly basis.
Well, I see 2 hands up. I'm not, Ms. Vice Chair Delaney?
Yes, since I made the motion. So I'm specifically asking for them to report why this is happening and then give us ideas about how to mitigate these problems and how these deaths can be avoided in the future. So I think it's a very important topic for both of those.
Okay, Mr. Ware?
Well, I agree with Ms. Domingos. I just want to know, I'm fine with the report. I just, we just report. What are we going to do to change? What are we going to do with the report? We're going to put it in the corner with all the other reports. What are we going to do? Who do we need to take that report to do to get that change to happen? That's what I want to know. I think among us, we've been doing this for a while now. We can pretty much tell this is what they need to do, and we can do it ourselves. But if we want to do another report, fine. I just want to have some action behind the reports.
Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, I understand where Mr. Ware and Ms. Domingos is coming from, but it's important to have evidence-based data in order to derive solutions, evidence-based solutions to problems. For example, when do these deaths occur? What hours? What day of the week? Do they happen during shift change? Do they happen during intake? Do they happen in the early morning hours? Do they happen when we have low staffing going on? Do they happen when we have young new deputies working? So there's a lot of data points that we can gather so that we know, where to look and how to craft a solution to that problem. And I think that's important. We now know we have an issue. We need to know where to look and find out the why. We know that something's happening, but we need to be able to have the granularity and the data to make good economical decisions on what to recommend. Do we know that whether all the surveillance cameras are working when we have these deaths? Is a certain number of them down? Is there long maintenance time to repair these things required? And that's when these things happen. So there's a lot of questions that we can answer with data, so we can get data-driven solutions.
Ms. Domingos?
Yeah, Mr. Wilson, I agree with everything you're saying. And here is my issue. Part of the motion was to have funding to, one, if I understand correctly, if not, correct me. One was to have funding to be able to do another research. And then most of all, what I actually reacted to was to also figure out within that research how to prevent these issues from happening. And issues, I state clearly, my understanding is the rising in custody deaths that now we're seeing on a weekly basis. And I do not believe I am exaggerating. What I'm trying to say is simple. We have had 3 town halls. So this board, like never before, actually took its own initiative to have 3 meetings, quote unquote, town halls, to hear from the public and to draw upon all the information we have gathered from all the data, all the family members that have spoken about their loved ones being, dying in custody, all that wonderful information. And one of those cries that we have been hearing from the public is to have a third party step in. My question to the board, and I don't even know if this is appropriate, please stop me, council, if this is not appropriate, but I just want to put this out there. Instead of just having, and I do believe this is great, but we have to have some type of action item attached with it, like Mr. Weir said. Otherwise, this is, I'm sorry, pardon me, just another piece of paper. And it's not going to stop people from dying behind bars. What I'm trying to say is, can we as a board, I don't know if it's a recommendation that we're going to have to do. I don't even know if we have the jurisdiction or the authority, but can we as a board recommend that the Attorney General's office comes and oversees the detention centers? Or can we recommend that the same office actually ask, or the governor ask a master to come in and oversee? And I'm not sure if the terminology is right. I believe it is. Those are the 2 tracks. And this is what we have predominantly consistently heard from the outcries of the public. So my question is, as a board, is this an action item that we want to attach? Do we even have the jurisdiction? Is this something we have to push to the next meeting till we have accurate information before we can vote on that motion? And I'm willing to make that motion.
Ms. Hoffman, would you like to address Ms. Domingos?
Yes, thank you. It would be appropriate to continue or to agendize this item for the next meeting since it's not agendized today. And Ms. Domingos, as you mentioned, to give us the opportunity to look into the specifics that you mentioned.
That's fair enough.
Ms. Hoffman, so, and I guess we'll work on the verbiage. You know what? I'll get with you at a later time. So we'll work on the verbiage for next month's agenda to Ms. Domingos's point, correct?
Okay, then I'm going back to Vice Chair Delaney.
That will work.
So I have a question.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hoffman, you're up.
I'm sorry, can I ask a clarifying question?
Ms. Hoffman, your connection is pretty bad. So go ahead and give it a shot.
I'm gonna step in. I know, I'm gonna type my question to Aurelia.
Okay, thank you.
Sometimes it helps to turn your camera off.
Aurelia, I'll type my question to you.
Okay, while she's typing the question, can we move to Ms. Delaney? Oh, no, do you have it?
Yes, it was actually a question about the motion. I think in the language of the motion, Vice Chair Delaney had specified Analytica as the party to do the follow-up report. Is that right?
Correct.
And that was one of the, I think that was the legal issue we wanted to know if it is if we're going to be seeking funds for an additional report, since it would be from a public agency, that would be something we would need to bid. We wouldn't be able to specify at this time for Analytica to do the report, if that makes sense. So there would need to be an amendment to the motion, assuming you wanted to go forward, so that it doesn't specify Analytica. It could still be follow-up from Analytica's original report, but we couldn't name who would do it.
Yeah,
Ms. Raza,
that makes sense.
And Ms. Raza, just so you know, I had conversations with purchasing contract. So that's why she's saying that, because we were told that, that could work, but I understand the verbiage for the motion, and I think you're correct with the appropriateness. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to address Ms. Domingos, and I will revise that motion as well as need be. But to my way of thinking, we already know that these deaths are happening, but we don't know why they're happening. And if we don't know why they're happening, then we can't know how to make the changes that are needed to stop them from happening. So until we have that, once we have that in hand, then we can make recommendations and say, do this, do this, do this. And if that doesn't happen, then we take further steps, whatever those might be. But I don't think we're there yet for the Attorney General. That's just my feeling. At this point, do I need to revise the motion, or are we continuing discussion?
Well, I think if you want the motion to continue, it has to be revised, because to council's point, because they are, it is a government agency, we can't specify who will do the report.
So I would like to, at this point, then just revise it and take out Analytica, the verbiage of Analytica.
Okay. And then continuing on with the discussion, unfortunately, I'm sorry, I don't know if Mr. Wilson or Ms. Pintar was first, but I know Mr. Wilson usually defers. And so then I would go to Ms. Pintar.
I think Mr. Wilson was first, but I'm happy to jump in.
Ladies first.
Okay. Here's what I'm struggling with. I am not opposed to having more analysis, but I do struggle with feeling like we have received recommendations already from the audit, from Analytica. I mean, some of them are already in the recommendations, changes that we've suggested to the Sheriff's Department. I mean, I am not an expert to say, what exactly needs to happen, but it seems pretty clear from, the state audit and the other studies that we've seen so far that a few things clearly need to happen, including additional, I don't know if it's medical care or mental health care. I mean, I feel like we have got a lot of information already, and I struggle with waiting for another study to be presented to us before we take action. And maybe we have somebody who provides a summary of the recommendations that we've received so far. It's hard to have a discussion like this now, I think, but maybe the rest of you can help me if I'm misunderstanding in terms of the recommendations we've received already from all of these other analyses that have happened over the last year or so. I mean, I'll give you for example, the recommendation that other sheriff's department have full-time or more than one or two mental health professionals available at intake. That seems like really something that we should be recommending and that should be done, and that could have an immediate impact. The recommendation, there has to be a recommendation, a way to figure out how to get fentanyl out of the jails. These people are coming in and getting drugs that they're ODing on weeks after they've been there. So I don't know if I'm sounding frustrated, I am, because I would like for us to be able to do something. So I'm not picking up the paper on a weekly basis and reading about another death in the jails. And I don't want to wait for another study before we do.
Mr. Wilson.
I do agree with Mr. Ware and Ms. Domingos and Ms. Pintar that we do have some data and we should be taking some actions. But for an example, I'd like to know which facility has the highest death rate in our system and focus on what programs could be put in place. I don't know the timing, but if we're having deaths within 28 to 40 hours of intake, maybe we need to look at the intake program and staff it, as Ms. Pintar mentioned, staff it with more mental health professionals. I don't know how understaffed the jail is. And does the understaffing make it so that the deputies can't do the things that they do? I know the deputies are expected to do a whole host of things. In fact, I've asked the question, what can we do to reduce the number of tasks that a deputy has to go through? Because you'll see a deputy standing there doing something and he has literally his hands full of paperwork. And he's trying to focus on several tasks. So, I'm in favor of attaching some action items and coming up with some. But also, I think that we would be very unwise in not collecting some data so we can have some evidence-driven solutions. I think that there's a way that we can work this together to make this happen, because Mr. Ware and Ms. Domingos and Ms. Pintar are absolutely right. We've had a lot of input. Now, as the old commercial would say, "Where's the beef?" I think there might be a way. There should be a way that we can accomplish this and do both.
Okay, Vice Chair Delaney.
I think I had my hand up before she did, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I saw both of you.
Go ahead, Ms. Domingos. I can wait.
Thank you much. What I'm just struggling with is when we first started this discussion, I wasn't even a CLERB board member. I used to attend meetings and I used to speak, right? I was one of those in the crowd when those 22 cases were dismissed. And we had mobilized to show up. And probably a year ago, the report from the papers and all the data we were seeing and following were saying maybe a death a month. And we were like, oh my gosh, this is too much. And the last few weeks, it's like one a week. My point is, we have progressive laws that are being, created, passed, in the process of passing. And it's like the more these progressive laws come into existence or have, a great potential, the more increase. We can just follow the Union Tribune. We don't have to, it's not rocket science. We can just literally follow the UT and see that there's pretty much one death a week. And that for me is already a state of urgency. Like if we do not see the urgency right now with all the data, like with the, the statewide audit and, everybody who has, done their data collections and reports, then I personally have an issue with that, because if we just have to sit and wait, I think we can do both. We can, put out the bid and have somebody look into all the concerns that other board members are having. But I also believe that when something is increasing, something has to happen to either stop it completely or have it at a standstill. We have now moved to one death a week. And I'm very sure this is not rocket science. If we don't do something now, like if we don't have an independent third party come in and oversee the detention centers, I do not believe that any legislature in this world or any report or data analysis can stop this issue. There has to be a third neutral party that has much more authority over those that are currently here, because evidently those that are currently here are, one, either overwhelmed, or two, they're having issues making sure that whichever laws they have are being respected by those on the ground. There's something fundamentally wrong. That's what I have issue with.
And then Vice Chair Delaney.
Well, I don't disagree. I do agree with what you're saying, Mr. Mingos and Mr. Ware and Ms. Pintar, but, and I'm not a particular fan of studies. I mean, sometimes they are expensive and you just wonder, well, what's the point? But to your point, Ms. Pintar, yes, fentanyl is a really major problem. But again, why is it happening? How is it happening in the jails? How, if we don't know the whys and the hows, then how can we factually say, here's what we need to do? I just think that in this particular case, we really need to get somebody in there that can dig in and say, this is why it's happening, this is how it's happening, and this is how we change that so it doesn't happen.
Mr. Ware.
Thank you. Thank you. I was just going to respond to a couple of things. Ms. Domingos, she mentioned the Attorney General's office or the third party. I don't think we're at that level either yet, but I would like to know what is the process and how long does that process take for something like that to happen? Because if it's a long drawn out process, then maybe we are at that point. I do think that I would like to definitely give Commander Hyder an opportunity, because I see some positive, I hear some positive things going on with the changes they're making. Results, so we're still seeing the deaths in there, but I think we're on the right track with her leadership. But I definitely want to give her that opportunity to make that change. And then with what Ms. Pintar mentioned earlier about having a summary of recommendations, I think that's a great idea. And but we continue to do the additional report, but I think a summary of recommendations would be a good chance for us to see where we need to go as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ware. And I believe the AG's office recommendation is, or discussion is going to be agendized for the next board meeting. And Ms. Pintar?
I'm sorry, Chair Youngflesh, I lost my train of thought as I was listening so intently to everyone else. If you could allow me a minute and come back to me, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Vice Chair Delaney, do you have further comment? Your hand is still up. So that's a no. Okay. I don't believe, yes.
Just so you're aware, there's still a member of the public, just for later when you can, just let you know there's a member of the public.
Okay, I think Ms. Pintar remembers her thought, and then I'll go to the member of the public.
I don't know what category I'd put this in terms of suggested action item or how we think about this, but I mean, to me, it seems like the overwhelming, from what we've seen from all the various data, is that, the Sheriff's Department is either ill-equipped, probably ill-equipped to deal with some of what they are being asked to manage in terms of people with substance abuse cases, or I think that we have a lot of people with mental health issues that are, having some sort of a crisis, and they're put in the jails, and the deputies and the officers are not equipped to help these people, and they probably don't belong in the jail in the first place because it's a mental health issue. And it seems like, that is sort of the root cause of a lot of what we're seeing in these cases. So I guess, is there a recommendation within all of these various studies that we've seen so far for how to address this as sort of a root cause? I don't know, that is just what I'm seeing when we read these cases and when we look at these studies that we've seen so far. So I don't know if we have a recommendation to address that.
Well, I think just to stay on point, there's still a motion that's on the table right now. So I think we have to address that motion, but for what I'm hearing from this discussion, it almost sounds like everyone's on the same page that we can run in a sort of a parallel course and continue to take action and also look for more data, if I'm summarizing correctly. But I do have a question for council prior to moving forward with the motion and calling for the vote. I know there is public comment. Should I go ahead and have the motion, since it is on the table, and have the vote called and then move to public comment?
Public comment should be taken before a vote is taken.
Okay, thank you. Then in that case, Mr. Parker, can you please call the member of the public who'd like to speak?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Brown, Dr. Arlie Brown.
Thank you very much. And this discussion has been very interesting. As an individual who has volunteered to work in jails and have provided help to people in jails, even youngsters, I hesitate to ask for I would only agree to do something like that as a tax-paying member if it was voted on by the public, because we are you all are a representation of the public. We have to take all, this is something that I agree with the data, because people feel different about things, but if you understand and know things from a knowledge standpoint, then you would get somewhere better. I like the data approach. I think the more information you have, the more you can present to the public. For example, let's look at the audit. Why would an audit not be more clear in where the people died and how they died? Every life is precious, but we have to, when you're dealing with something like this, I think truth is the most important thing. You need the total truth, because only after the total truth would you be able to make a collaborative, servant-oriented solution or recommendation. I think it's very difficult to even call, I think it would be very difficult or very challenging to call the Attorney General if you were to just provide them with the data of how these deaths have occurred. And, I was talking to some people, lawyers recently, and they were talking about how difficult it is with COVID and everything to even become incarcerated. So people, I don't like to see people dying, but also we shouldn't allow the voices of a few drive the narrative of the entire. And I really think that we need to give it more consideration. I think we should, if something like this should go to the public or go to a larger body of individual, because here's what's caught up in that. You're talking about the lives of 4,000 people, not just the jail people. You're talking about, and to be honest with you, I believe law enforcement has taken a beating over the last few years. They are parents, our family members, our brothers, our sisters. Even Dave Myers was in law enforcement for 30 some years. And I don't know why he's not still there, but I'm just saying, we just need more information before we can just tell people they're not working their hardest to resolve this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Okay, and if we have no other comments from the public, Mr. Parker, I'll go back to the board. I see that Ms. Domingos has her hand up.
We have no other comments from the public, Chair Young.
Ms. Domingos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, I'd like to comment to what Dr. Brown just said. I personally believe that it's important that loved ones who have lost their family members that come to these meetings and speak should be heard. And to just classify that as emotional, I have issues with. And I have another question for Mr. Brown. I'm not sure. Have you ever lost a loved one to police brutality? I know that we have at least one board member here. And I would just be very cautious not to take space, especially when one is not directly impacted, especially with public comments, because it's almost like it's then minimize the legitimacy of the hurt of the family members. And that's, for me, is just a slippery slope.
Okay, are there any other board member comments, questions? Mr. Ware?
Yes, I was just gonna say, and personally knowing Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown, that in no way represents what he meant. He's not insensitive to those that have been lost. I just want to speak for, I don't know if he can come back on, but I know for a fact that's not what he meant. So, but anyway, we go forward, and I'm looking forward to doing some great things. Chair Youngflesh, thank you for doing what you do. I appreciate you. The sacrifice you've been making. You've been here a lot longer than you probably want to be here at this point, but thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ware. And I saw Dr. Brown, but I don't see him anymore. And I'm not sure if Mr. Parker, I don't believe that this is appropriate to go back and forth, but I am not sure because it is public comment.
Right, Chair Youngflesh, unfortunately, I don't believe it is.
No.
At this point, unless Ms. Hoffman overrules me. But Mr. Brown's had his 3 minutes for public comment, and
That's correct.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And Ms. Kank, I do see that your hand's up.
I just, Chair Youngflesh, do we need a second for that motion?
No, it has been seconded, and now it's just open floor to discuss, and then once the discussion has ended, we'll just call for the vote.
Okay, thank you.
Which I believe is now, unless there's any further discussion. Okay, so
Would
Mr. Parker.
Would you mind again just restating the motion?
Oh, it's been so long. Vice Chair Delaney, would you mind restating the motion?
Yeah, if I can find my notes. Hang on one second here. I'd like to ask the board, make a motion that we request funds to have a follow-up study done on why San Diego has the highest in custody death rates and how these deaths can be avoided, recommendations on how these deaths can be avoided.
Thank you. Is that sufficient language, Ms. Hoffman?
Yeah, just to clarify, is this just the funding or for to authorize Paul to go forward and get a contract in place to do that?
May I respond?
Of course.
I believe that we would have to get well, it's two-part. If we can get the funding, then go ahead and have Paul do it. So is that sufficient, or do I have to do two motions? Well, I guess it wouldn't matter. Sorry, I'm talking in circles here. If we're getting the funding, then we're also approving Paul getting a consultant, correct?
I just want to make that clear so that we don't have to come back.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
take the additional time if that's the intent.
Thank you, Ms. Holman.
It was seconded by Mr. Wilson, and I see that Ms. Pintar's hand is up for additional comment.
Question.
Okay.
Mr. Parker, Paul, is a summary of the recommendations that have already been made from the existing study something that you can do internally, or would this be something that would fall within the study that Vice Chair Delaney is requesting?
Okay, what I can do and what we've already been doing, to be clear, is we've been looking at obviously the state auditor, that report, and Analytica's report. And you'll see that many of the recommendations that we've made either they're closely aligned with the ones that were made by the state, and they're also closely aligned with the data that has thus far been provided by Analytica. You know, the ones we're going to talk about tonight, right? At least one of them. So just so we are looking at what has been provided to us thus far and making appropriate recommendations, which I believe is the extent of our jurisdiction at this point to do so. That being said, as much as I hate that phrase, that being said, I see the validity in what is being asked for insofar as when exactly did these deaths happen. So look, any additional information that comes from any additional studies, what's going to be the teeth in them? There's not going to be any teeth unless we make a recommendation. And even then, quite frankly, we're advisory only. So we'll continue to make these recommendations no matter where those recommendations come from, whether it's from studies, whether it's from data, whether it's from just, you know, researching other best practices. So whatever this board wants to do so that we can continue to stay within our jurisdiction to make these recommendations so that these ideas come up and we listen to the community and all these studies. Does that help? I mean, that's where I'm at with this. I'm all in with whatever the board wants to do, but we're already responding to a lot of this as of right now.
Yes, that helps because again, I'm not opposed to, you're right, any additional information, which is why I will support Ms. Delaney's motion, but I just want to be clear that we are also taking this sort of a dual track here. We're also making some recommendations that we can act on now. So you clarified it for me, so thank you.
And with that, and seeing no other hands, Mr. Parker, can you please call the vote?
Chair Youngflesh.
Yes.
Vice Chair Delaney.
Yes.
Ms. Domingos.
No.
Ms. Keenayuk.
I abstain.
Kank.
Yes.
Ms. Pintar.
Yes.
Mr. Ware.
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Yes.
Vote passes 6-1 with 1 abstention.
Okay, thank you. And then do we have, I don't believe we have any need to discuss anything else on 7C. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I'd move on to 7D, which is the policy recommendation. And I would turn it over to you again, Mr. Parker.
The only thing for 7C would be if any additional board members want me to do or want to discuss doing something else other than pursuing the funding reference to the data, but nobody said anything, so I think we're good, Chair Youngflesh. With that, oh, Ms. Pintar.
Sorry. I know we've got it's a long night, but since this is since 7D is specific to naloxone, Dr. Campman said that he had the data, and Paul, you and I talked about this too, that the majority of the deaths, he has a breakdown of the deaths in the jails. The majority of them he believed were overdoses. And I would just like to know if you could circulate that information, get that data from him. He said it's available already, and circulate it to us. And because I think it's appropriate, back up to recommendation 7D. It could be appropriate backup or evidence as to why 7D should be adopted by the Sheriff's Department.
Chair Youngflesh, you've heard Ms. Pintar. I can always work with Dr. Campman, and actually was going to reach out to him based on his presentation anyway to see what kind of data he can provide. Do you want me to just do that without having to do a vote? I mean, that's what I was going to do anyway, if that's all right.
Yeah, that would be fine. I don't think
I'll bring that back. Yeah, I'll bring that back next month. Whenever I can get the information from the medical examiner's office, I'll bring it back.
Okay.
Absolutely. Clear to move on, Chair Youngflesh?
Yes, please.
All right. So attachment H, this item has come up. Obviously, it should be made very clear that, you know, we gave the background as to, okay, so the Sheriff's Department has the highest rate, the only statistically significant per Analytica for overdose rates when compared to the 11 other counties, and obviously with the auditor report and whatnot. Having said that, the Sheriff's Department has specifically said, and I know that they're willing to come to a meeting to talk additionally. They've already given us their drug interdiction efforts that they've done. And so this at the time was not part of that. We know that there was a pilot program going on all of their deputies have naloxone right now. That's not a pilot program. That's in effect. There's a pilot program by LA County Sheriff's Department that they allowed naloxone access provided to inmates. So that's what we're doing. That's the recommendation that we are making to you as the board. My understanding is that the Sheriff's Department they may already be researching this issue and looking at the feasibility of doing so. So, and that's great. We want to do this recommendation as well, just to show that we are responsive to the audit. We are responsive to the causes and manners that we're aware of already, to all this conversation. And this seems like the next reasonable step to attempt to minimize, reduce the deaths occurring. This is one way to, once the drugs get in, and our next policy recommendation is yet another way for us to attempt to minimize drugs getting in. With that, that's the background. The recommendation would be to, pursuant to the National Commission on Correctional Health Care, what they support, to make naloxone readily available to San Diego County Detention Facility inmates, and to educate inmates on opioid overdose and its signs, correct technique and administration of naloxone, and essential procedures, including the performance of CPR. Those are the two recommendations that we bring to your board.
And with that, then we would need a motion to approve those recommendations. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And Ms. Pintar, is that a motion to approve the recommendations?
Move to approve the recommendation.
Okay, and seconded by Mr. Wilson. Is there any discussion from the board? No. And is there any public comment on this item?
I see none.
Okay. And then with that, I'd ask for Mr. Parker, if you could call the vote, please.
Chair Youngflush,
Yes.
Vice Chair Delaney,
Yes.
Ms. Domingos,
Yes.
Ms. Keen Ayub,
Yes.
Ms. Kink,
Yes.
Ms. Pintar,
Yes.
Mr. Ware,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Yes.
Vote passes 8-0. So we will move forward with that. I will put that in writing to the Sheriff's Department officially tomorrow.
Thank you. And if you could please introduce the next policy recommendation under agenda item 7E.
Sure. I had an opportunity to meet the fentanyl dog. The Sheriff's Department has a dog that is specifically trained, that was purchased and trained to detect fentanyl during the course of jail inspections or whatnot, whatever department seems fit to do so. This is a brand new program for them. I met the dog and his handler, and I know that they're committed to doing everything they can with this dog to detect fentanyl. Obviously, we want to make a recommendation that the policies for the K9 program are updated to include the fentanyl dog procedures. And I know it's a new program. The policies haven't been updated as of yet. I know they're in the process of doing so, but we want to make sure that those are done. Of course, that's our recommendation, but also to maybe clarify, at least make a recommendation that to do so, the policy and procedure should include that the fentanyl canine be used for searches of contraband in all areas, to conduct sniffs, that's the terminology that's already in the policy for the other dogs, to conduct sniffs of all persons entering a facility, to include visitors, inmates, and staff, and to conduct sniffs of persons already inside of a facility, to include visitors, inmates, and staff. So with that, that's our recommendation, that they look at all of those areas to use the dog for, update their policies and procedures. And if, and again, jurisdictionally, we can't, say, well, we would recommend that the department get more money, but obviously it's a no-brainer that they only have one. These dogs will be life-saving. And if there's a way that they can, I would love for them to do and I know that they want to get more money to do everything they can to get more dogs as well. So that's just my take on that. But our recommendation, staying within our guidelines, is to update the manual to include the sniffs of people entering and already in the facility, to include employees, inmates, staff. Back to you.
Thank you. And Ms. Kank, are you making a motion to support the policy recommendation?
Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Ware, are you seconding the motion?
That's not a question,
Okay,
Mr. Parker. Is it for the inmates and personnel's person? Or does that include, for example, if there's a desk over here that belongs to a staff, can that be searched or sniffed?
Look, I would think that the department should be able to use that dog to sniff whatever it wants, whether it's property, persons, whatever, inside the facility. Anything should be fair game, but I don't, again, it's in a detention facility, so I don't know what the legalities are as far as employee property. I don't know any of that. But as far as inside the detention facility where the inmates are themselves, staff and whatnot, all of that stuff. So
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
oh, Ms. Cake made the motion. Is there a second to support the policy recommendation? Seconded by Vice Chair Delaney. Mr. Parker, can you, well, first off, let me see, is there any other board member comments or questions? Open the floor.
No, and it doesn't look like there's any public comment on this item as well.
Then can you please call the vote?
Chair Youngflesh. Oh, wait a minute. Wait, Dr. Brown has a public comment in reference to item 7E.
Okay.
Dr. Brown.
I think it's an excellent idea to not only have that program, but to increase the number of dogs. And I don't want to refer back to my earlier conversation, but every life is precious. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm a Black man from the South, and I've seen more than any of you have ever seen, or I pray that you never see what I've seen, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Chair Youngflesh, that concludes public comment.
Thank you. And if you can please call the vote, Mr. Parker.
Oh, I apologize. Chair Youngflesh.
Yes.
Vice Chair Delaney.
Yes.
Ms. Domingos.
Yes.
Ms. Kinayu.
Yes.
Ms. King.
Yes.
Ms. Pintar.
Yes.
Mr. Ware.
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Yes.
Vote passes 8-0, Chair Youngflesh.
Thank you. Moving on to 7F, countywide protocol for the investigation of officer-involved shootings. Again, Mr. Parker, if you wouldn't mind.
All right, thank you so very much. Quite frankly, I misplaced the MOU. Oh, here it is. So this is an item that it was within the last month. The chiefs of police here in San Diego County, along with Acting Sheriff Martinez, entered into a memorandum of understanding. Now, this memorandum of understanding was a proactive attempt on the part of county law enforcement. Proactive attempt. There's an assembly bill that's not been passed yet. It's Assembly Bill 594. And what this assembly bill is saying, what it's contemplating is that notwithstanding those investigations that will be covered by Assembly Bill 1506, to be clear, Assembly Bill 1506 is when law enforcement shoots an unarmed person. At that time, the Department of Justice, Attorney General's office will participate in and lead that investigation, is my understanding. That's what Assembly Bill 1506 is. So notwithstanding that, Assembly Bill 594 was to have law enforcement entities, an independent law enforcement agency, investigate these uses of force, shootings and uses of force resulting in deaths. To have either an independent law enforcement agency, district attorney, or a multidisciplinary task force to do so. So what the police chiefs and the sheriff in this county chose to do was to be proactive and was to enter into this MOU before the law became effective. So that's where we are. So what this MOU indicates is that if the San Diego Sheriff's Department, heaven forbid, it gets involved in a shooting and someone dies, if they're the only entity, the only agency involved in the shooting, the San Diego Police Department will investigate, will become the lead agency, the primary investigative agency on that shooting. If the San Diego Police Department gets involved in the shooting, then the San Diego Sheriff's Department will become involved and becomes a primary investigative agency for that shooting. If the police department, San Diego, and the San Diego Sheriff's Department, if their personnel become involved in the same shooting incident, the Chula Vista Police Department will become the primary law enforcement entity that would conduct the investigation into that shooting. The purpose of this, and I've learned this from talking to law enforcement entities, the purpose of this was to increase the public trust. Now, you can make an argument all day long, and law enforcement I know is aware of this, that is the investigation of one law enforcement agency into another law enforcement agency's use of deadly force, does that increase public trust or not? The debate's open on that, right? You'll have folks that say, no, it doesn't. It's just one agency covering for another. We know that that's going to be the thought for some folks. What truly increases public trust, at least I think, is for the community to have some involvement and have some say. Now, it is true that law enforcement doesn't have to run everything by CLERB, and law enforcement doesn't have to run everything by its independent civilian oversight entities. But I participated in, the concern is that the San Diego Police Department's Community on Policing Practices and its Community Advisory Board had a meeting on April 21st. They did want CLERB to participate in this meeting as part of a town hall. Now, we all know about the town hall and co-sponsorships, so I did not convene a meeting with CLERB to ask about co-sponsoring something, but I did attend as the executive officer. The concern was that the community was not notified of this change before hearing about it in a press release, in a press conference. That's a true statement. I was unaware of that. I knew, based upon the MOU that we currently have for death scene response, first off, I already knew, because we've been involved in two, or the Sheriff's Department's been involved in two deputy-involved shootings since our MOU, separate, went into effect. And those are outside entities investigating those shootings. That's what I assumed would happen anyway. But the community was not, there was not involvement of the community. So that was the main concern that was brought forward. So that's where we are. I know that this topic is on the agenda because a board member asked for it to be on the agenda because of their concern about no community involvement, no consideration of community, no input from the community. So that's why we're here tonight. That's what we think. I know me as the executive officer, and I talked to the Sheriff's Department, and they're very open to me about it. I'll continue to say that what we'll keep pushing for is community involvement, transparency, keeping family members involved, or at least up to date as to what's going on, and things like this. So that's my take on that. That's why it's on the agenda. With that, the only thing that this would, so what's going to happen now? We have the MOU for death scene responses that we mentioned earlier that the Sheriff's Department and I are working to make even better. Still not going to cover deputy involved shootings. I'm still not going to be able to do anything. I mean, I'll be able to be on the outside perimeter, just as we are now, just as the MOU is currently written. But if the San Diego Police Department is conducting the investigation, they have no agreement with us, zero. Chula Vista has no agreement with us. So what would have to probably happen, right, is that we would have to, I would have to try to forge an agreement with those entities so that we can get what the Sheriff's Department is giving us. What they're giving us is closer access. They're giving us a witness list within 30 days. They're keeping me up to date. And then, so that's where we are. That's the whole concern with this. I turn it over to you, Chair Youngflesh.
Thank you. And I'd open the floor to any board member comments or questions, Mr. Parker. Ms. Kank.
I just want to know how this changes our role in deputy involved shootings.
This changes our role. Okay. The only two things I can come up with. Well, first off, from a big picture perspective, it changes our role in that, okay, the Sheriff's Department just went out on a limb, if you want to use that terminology, and has allowed us to exert our authority, what the law clearly allows us to do, which is to investigate pursuant to our rules and regulations. There's a state law that says that we are entitled to be at these scenes or to do our investigation without obstructing law enforcement. That's number one. So what it does is, big picture, we will have no say. Let's say there's an investigatory issue with, let's say we're reviewing the case afterwards, and we think that the investigation, for whatever reason, was not factual, there were some issues with it or whatever. We have no jurisdiction over that because it's going to be San Diego PD that's doing those investigations. That's number one. Number two, it's not going to change our access right now because we don't have the access. but it's going to change our ability to opine about the conduct of the investigation, the actions of the sworn members that are investigating it. That's what it's going to change. That's what I can see. Otherwise, those are the two issues.
Mr. Wilson.
I have some serious concerns because I lack a lot of information. And I think the communication on this issue by the law enforcement leadership in the county, to include the DA's office, has not been good. On the surface, this could look like a quid pro quo. Sheriff's department takes care of the police department. Police department takes care of the sheriff's department. Though I'm not sure that was even considered. And that's my very concern, that the law enforcement leadership in San Diego County never considered that perhaps they ought to reach out and interact and let an agency such as ours, the CLERB, who deals in transparency and representing the public, have an inkling of what they're up to. Because this does, on the face of it, look like they're circumventing the CLERB and the city's Citizens Review Board. And that's very concerning. That decision process is very concerning. That, you know, when we take courses in ethics, we're taught that if it creates the appearance of impropriety, don't do it. And I'm just amazed that the law enforcement leadership in this county would not think that perhaps the Citizens Review Board and the CLERB may be individuals whose support and endorsement they may need on this thing. And I'm not sure how it happened. Was this done by a committee? Did individual chiefs get together? Do they have an organization? If they have an organization, what are the minutes? Who voted on what? You know, I'm very interested in a lot of this, but I don't know any of this. Quite frankly, if I had some more information and there was a little bit of outreach and a sincere regard for the citizenry and the hard work that the Citizens Review Board does and the CLERB, I may have reacted to this very positively. You know, I have questions like, how do you prevent conflict of interest? You know, deputies know police officers and police officers know deputies. What mechanisms are in place to prevent conflict of interest? If it was significant enough to write an MOU over, then we need to see interagency and interjurisdiction policies and procedures. We need to see interagency and interjurisdictional protocol. We need to see mechanisms to ensure there are not conflicts of interest. And how will we know that the officers investigating the sheriff's department or vice versa, the PD investigating the sheriff's department or the deputies investigating the PDs, how do we know that we'll have quality assurance that the investigators will be of the same caliber?
So are you asking, Mr. Wilson, are you asking Mr. Parker to go back and look into these issues?
No, I'm just letting you know that it would be nice to know these things. What's the communication plan? What's the logistics plan? As a citizen of Carlsbad, if my chief authorizes the police department here to investigate a shooting and it goes into hundreds of hours of overtime, if one of our officers slips and hurts themselves while investigating a sheriff's shooting, and it turns into workman's comps and then into disability. As a citizen of Carlsbad, I'd like to know who's going to authorize that kind of expenditure, because that's an unplanned expenditure. And if departments are short personnel now and they have their best investigators tied up with other departments, how are they going to manage the workload? So I just have a lot of questions, and I was hoping that somebody would come before the CLERB and maybe address this. And I can see some merit in all of this. but also at the same time, I'm really concerned that we're being circumvented. And you know, we've worked really hard on engaging the sheriff's department and being transparent. And at this particular point, it's clear the law enforcement leadership has no regard for the effort that the CLERB has been putting out there to improve relationships with the community, with the law enforcement, and to be transparent. I'm extremely disappointed and very frustrated. I don't know, maybe we ought to form an ad hoc committee to look into this MOU and how it affects us. Maybe we need to have an MOU with the San Diego City Citizens Review Board. Will the San Diego Police Department respond to us like the Sheriff's Department? Will they be accountable to us, their officers, like the deputies are accountable to us? If there's something goes wrong, who gets to look at it? City of San Diego Citizens Review Board, the CLERB. We've got to hash all these things out. But I think there's a lot of questions. And my last comment is they put that MOU out there, and it looks like they want to make it up as they go along now. I'm very, very unhappy with this.
Mr. Ware.
I don't know what office Mr. Wilson is running for, but he's got my vote. He said everything I wanted to say. Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Okay. And I see that council has comment too. Aurelia?
Thank you. I just wanted to address one quick thing just for clarification of the MOU. I'm actually going to read the portion of it just to set the context. So in the MOU itself, it says this agreement applies solely to criminal investigations and does not address or impact an agency's ability to conduct their own concurrent or subsequent investigation for administrative or civil litigation purposes. So it's not in response to anything. This was the time to speak. I just wanted to clarify for the purpose of discussion that the MOU is, again, it's specific to criminal investigations. I have no information as to what the sheriff department is going to do, but the MOU does not impact or hinder the sheriff's department or probation's department to conduct their own investigation for purposes of administrative or civil litigation, just to clarify for the discussion.
Ms. Kank?
Well, my question to you is, when is an officer-involved shooting not a criminal investigation?
And to you being the council? Ms. Kank, are you addressing your question to council?
Yes.
I can respond to that. I didn't mean that criminal investigation would not occur. It's rather could be concurrent investigations. So in the event of an officer involved shooting or something to that effect, and Mr. Parker could speak more specific to the exact protocol, but there may be concurrent issues going on where there's a criminal investigation as to whether to file criminal charges, and there could be an administrative investigation concurrently as to how that should be handled within, an internal investigation, not whether or not to file charges, but whether or not discipline should be imposed. But Mr. Parker, if you have more specific information.
I'd like to just add on to what you're saying. To Ms. Kank's point, yes, it's going to be a criminal investigation all day long. Every death investigation that occurs is a criminal investigation, and that came right from a former lieutenant with the Division of Inspectional Services a couple of years ago. That's the stance, and that's what's going on. That's number one. Unfortunately, to Ms. Raza's point, we don't have access to the administrative investigations. We don't have access to any other investigations. That's not going to be provided to us. The only thing that's going to be provided to us is the criminal investigation, and that criminal investigation will be conducted by the San Diego PD or Chula Vista PD. That's all we're going to have access to look at how that was investigated. Now, to be also clear, and I don't want to paint a picture that's not true, the San Diego Police Department, we have issued subpoenas to them, and they do provide the information at the end of their investigation. And that information actually comes from the sheriff's department. Like they'll give us, like I just on something that we're going to talk about here real soon, they give us a stack. So we are getting the information at the very end of the investigation. There's just nothing at the initial scene as far as CLERB's response, nothing about the witness list, nothing about being updated as we go. So hopefully that clarifies what Ms. Raza was saying and answers your question, Ms. Kink.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Mr. Ware.
Yes, to Ms. Rossel's, I think definition, thank you for sharing that information. Mr. Parker, so are we saying it's a criminal investigation or it's a criminal investigation involving an officer involved shooting that leads to a death? It seems like we're getting a more general, more broad, which I'm actually in favor in, because it seems like we, from a school system standpoint, we have become unfortunately very good at responding to school shootings. We've been very good at that now, unfortunately. But so we're focusing on now the concerning behaviors that lead up to those shootings. So I'm thinking over here, are we getting very good at responding to officer-involved shootings and not addressing officer-involved shootings that lead to death and not investigating the officer-involved shootings that doesn't lead to death? For Mr. Parker.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So basically, what you're asking me is if this involves deaths as not just deaths?
Correct.
Okay. Well, as far as, and again, I could be wrong here, but it's talking about all peace officer involved shootings, and then a use of force incidents and resulting in death, and then in custody related deaths occurring outside of the jail. Those are the three categories. So my understanding of that is all peace officer involved shootings, not necessarily resulting in death, but peace officer involved shootings, and then use of force incidents resulting in death, and in custody related deaths occurring outside of the jail. That's why this MOU was entered into.
Thank you.
I see no more board member comments. I don't believe this is an action item.
There is a public comment, Chair Young.
Okay.
Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown.
I might be mistaken, but I believe that for each of those shootings, the district attorney's office also investigates, and the FBI also. I think they have a standard policy where they come in and investigate officer-involved shootings as well. So you could check me on that, but I'm almost sure that they also participate in officer-involved shooting. And it might be even more organizations, but I know the agency, the district attorney, investigators are there, and now the FBI might also have the state of California Justice Department. I'm not sure about that, but I know the district attorney's office and the FBI are there as well on officer-involved shootings. I will yield back.
Thanks, Dr. Brown.
And then I see Ms. Kank has her hand up. Ms. Kank.
Yeah, to respond to that, Dr. Brown, the district attorney does get involved in every officer involved shooting, and they determine whether or not there was criminal activity involved, and whether to prosecute the officer or not. 99% of the time, there's not, but there has been times when there has been.
Okay. Then there is no more public comment I'm aware of, and no more board member comments. So I believe we can move on to the unfinished business under 8A, which is the vote to continue or terminate investigation of CLERB case number 20050 bills pursuant to CLERB rules and regulations section 5.8. And again, Mr. Parker, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Youngflesh. Last month, this board, we brought to the board a deputy involved shooting death of Nicholas Bills. We received the materials. The deputy involved that shot and killed Mr. Bills is no longer an employee of the sheriff's department. He resigned and was sentenced to time in custody. This board, I asked this board for some guidance. I reached out to Mr. Bills's mother, Kathy Bills, explained to her the situation as to what our jurisdiction is, what it's not, and asked her what her thoughts were as to whether she would like us to investigate, despite the fact that he no longer is an employee, that he's doing time. And she said yes. She would ask the board for us to continue the investigation for the purpose of looking at whatever policies and procedures may be recommended to change to prevent a similar death in the future. So that's Ms. Bill's recommendation to this board. And so with that, Chair Youngflesh.
Okay. And with that, do I hear or see a motion to continue or a motion to terminate the investigation by any of the board members? There has to be some action. I guess if there's neither action, then it would just terminate. So Ms. Kina-Youb, what motion are you making?
I make a motion to continue the investigation per the request of the family members.
Okay, and I do believe, Mr. Ware, your hand was up. Are you seconding? Okay. And then I would open the floor to comment. Ms. Domingos, would you like to make a comment, or was that to second as well?
Second, and to say I agree with Ms. Kina-Youb.
Okay. Are there any other public, or I'm sorry, is there any other board member comments before I turn to public comment or discussion? Okay, seeing none, is there any comments from the public?
No.
Okay. And Mr. Parker, can you please call for the vote?
Chair Youngflesh,
Yes.
Vice Chair Delaney,
Yes.
Ms. Domingos,
Yes.
Ms. Kina-Youb,
Yes.
Ms. Kenk,
Abstain.
Ms. Pintar,
Yes.
Mr. Ware,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Yes.
Vote passes 7-1 with 7, no, I lied. Yeah, 7 with 1 abstention. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to 8B, the update. And again, I think this would be you, Mr. Parker.
It is, and quite frankly, for 8B and 8C, unless there's public comment, I'm just going to stick with what we've been talking about every month. We are still in the process. There's still an assembly bill going that's moving forward that we've asked the county to support, which would be the elimination of the complete overturning of the Copley Press case, which would increase transparency, which is exactly what we're asking for: decrease transparency and civilian oversight, which would go back to having our public, the cases discussed in open session, things along those lines. There's no movement on that yet, other than it's working its way through the assembly, is my understanding. So I have no other update on 7B.
Is there any other board member comment on either 8B or 8C? Seeing none, is there any public comment?
No public comment that I see. And as far as 8C goes, we're still working labor relations and county council to continue to push forward the whole concept of, us having jurisdiction over those folks providing medical and mental health care to the folks in the custody of the sheriff's department. So no comments from the public, Chair Youngflesh.
Okay. And any board member comment on 8C? Okay. And then moving right along to 8D, update San Diegans for Justice CLERB Report Subcommittee. And I understand, Mr. Parker, you're willing to handle this one as well.
With everything we've been doing over the last month, I have gotten a little sidetracked with going through each of the 70 recommended areas for improvement that were made by the San Diegans for Justice report. If you recall, they recommended that we receive substantially more funding and then 70 different ways that we could improve what we do. Many of those recommendations I'm fully supportive of. At this point, I'm going through creating the spreadsheet so that I can report back to this board on the things that staff, that we have a responsibility that we can implement, things that you folks are going to have to, and then things that the Board of Supervisors will have to be taken there. That's in progress. That's where we stand at this point.
Thank you. Are there any board member comments or questions regarding that agenda item? And is there any public comment?
No.
All right, well, moving on to 9, board member comments. Are there any general board member comments? This would be your time to make it. Seeing none, I'll move on to 10, Sheriff Probation Liaison Query. Do any board members have any questions for the Sheriff Probation Liaisons that are here tonight? Okay, then moving to closed session, I would ask council to read us into closed session.
Pursuant to Government Code Section 54957, this board will convene in closed session to consider item 11 on tonight's agenda.
Okay, and with that, should I suggest that we can take a 5-minute break, 10-minute break? Okay, 10-minute break, come back.
Back at 9:20. Thank you.
All right, thank you.